A 15-year-old boy, Tim Cynthia, is practicing swordsmanship with the determination to become an adventurer. A woman stood nearby, silently observing. After practice, Tim went inside, wondering if he could get 4 hours of sleep before starting his next task. As soon as I walked in, 3 boys appeared before him. One of them complained about Tim practicing swordsmanship every day, bothering them. The second told Tim not to dream of becoming strong because he would never improve. The first guy mocked Tim, saying that even though he'd been in the group for 3 years, he was still just a rookie. He said he'd be embarrassed if it were him. Then he scoffed, asking Tim if he really believed he could become an explorer, advising him to give up because you will always be just a servant. In a cruel act, he broke Tim's sword. He said that perhaps the boy would give up now. Tim, feeling disappointed, sat down with the broken sword in his hand, anxious and unsure of what to do next. The girl, who had been watching him from a distance, remained silent and offered no help. The next morning, Swordmaster Ganesh arrived and called for Tim. Everyone around was surprised, not understanding what Ganesh wanted from Tim. Approaching closer, Ganesh whispered in Tim's ear that the president was calling him. Tim felt his heart sink, a wave of fear washing over him as he heard the president's name, wondering what this would mean for him. As they left, a young female doctor named Fiona walked by, catching Tim's attention. Ganesh led Tim to a door and told him to go inside. The chairman allowed Tim in and told Ganesh to return to his work, which Ganesh agreed to. When Tim walked into Gilnari's, the chairperson was seated in her chair. She was about to explain why she had called him, but before she could say anything, Tim knelt down and apologized, begging her not to expel him from the club. The club president was surprised by Tim's unexpected apology. In a moment of emotion, Tim confessed that he wanted to become an explorer, but he felt hopeless because he was poor at both swordsmanship and magic, and begged her not to send him away. President Gilnari's comforted Tim, telling him to calm down and assuring him that she had only called him in to check on his progress. She asked if anything worried him, like a difficult job or being bullied by others. Tim replied that he had no complaints, and that becoming a member of the organization was like a dream come true. Gilnari's encouraged him to share anything that was bothering him and promised to help. Tim hesitated but eventually spoke up, saying it wasn't dissatisfaction. She asked him again if he was sure. Recognizing her genuine concern, Tim confessed that there was one thing he wished for. Gilnari's excitedly asked what it was. Tim explained that he wanted to try participating in a mission. She warned that it would be a dangerous mission, but Tim insisted that he was ready. He had been in the guild for 3 years without ever participating in a mission, and felt that simply doing menial tasks wasn't enough for someone who wanted to become an explorer. Gilnari's understood Tim's enthusiasm, but was still worried about the potential danger he might be in. Gilnari's offered to accompany Tim on the mission, ensuring his safety. "Let's not waste time," she said. Just then, Tim noticed that her ring had started to glow. She used it to contact the reception desk, who immediately asked what was wrong. Gilnari's explained the situation to her. Tim realized that the ring was a treasure, a rare item known for its ability to grant its user mystical powers. He had heard of such treasures before and knew they came in many different varieties. Gilnari's asked the receptionist if there were any simple requests. The receptionist replied that for the guildmaster, hunting an A-rank imperial dragon was feasible, or even M-rank quests would be easy. However, Gilnari's refused and inquired about the request to gather herbs. The receptionist regretfully replied that such simple requests were not available within the Gilnari's group. Gilnari's then decided to create the request himself, and said that Tim would take on the role. Tim felt a little overwhelmed, thinking that things were happening too quickly. The receptionist agreed with the president's decision. Then Gilnari's turned to Tim and asked when he had his next day off. Tim replied that it would be around noon tomorrow. Gilnari's confirmed this and immediately told Raphael to cancel their lunch plans for tomorrow. Tim was stunned, unable to believe his ears. Was she talking to Raphael during the holy night? Raphael, hearing Gilnari's decision, asked if she would be skipping lunch with the managers tomorrow. Gilnariz explained that she had decided to go on assignment with Tim instead. Raphael was surprised, asking who Tim was, but quickly understood that the situation was urgent and unavoidable. Tim was still stunned by everything that had happened. Noticing his surprise, Gilnariz said she would prepare lunch tomorrow. She asked if there was anything he would like to eat. She encouraged Tim to be honest, because she had practiced cooking and would make whatever he asked. Tim hesitated for a moment before replying that he liked fried eggs. Just then, Blue Spear Natalia burst in, clearly angry. She slammed the door open, and in an irritated voice, they asked if Gilnariz would actually skip their lunch tomorrow. Gilnariz calmly reminded her that Natalia wasn't allowed in. Soon after, the other explorers arrived. Windcutter Nia approached Gilnariz and asked if it was all right for them to stay. She had heard Raphael's account of the situation and was clearly very upset. She expressed her anger, saying it was humiliating that the head of the guild had prioritized a task for Tim over them. For adventurers like them, at mithril level, that was understandable, but hearing about someone like Tim, who only did menial tasks, was unacceptable. Nia pointed at Tim and added that it was inappropriate for someone like him to be speaking to Guildmaster Gilnariz. Gilnariz ordered everyone to leave without hesitation. Nia, surprised by Gilnariz's firmness, asked if she was really serious. Gilnariz gave them a cold stare, warning them not to make her repeat herself. She said that, although this time she would overlook their insults towards Tim, but they had to leave immediately. The explorers, deservedly reprimanded, bowed in apology and departed. Tim, still confused, ran his hand through his hair. He couldn't help but think the managers were clearly annoyed. But what puzzled him was why Gilnariz was taking such a strong stance. Then, to his astonishment, she suddenly called them back and bowed before them. Tim froze at this gesture. Gilnariz looked up and apologized to him, explaining that the group should honor an ideal, not her. Tim told her to lift her head, explaining that he was just an errand boy. He knelt before her and added that if she continued to bow her head, he would humble himself even further. With a gentle smile, she asked why he had to bow his head like that. Tim replied that the odd jobs he did were what kept the society running. And she seemed to be the only one who understood that. Gilnariz assured him that she would be meeting other people tomorrow, probably in the dining room. As Natalia's group left, Tim muttered to himself that if it weren't for that sacred artifact, he wouldn't have had to bow to her. He seemed a little cheeky in his thinking. Nia overheard this and wondered why the president supported Tim so much. She said she had an idea, but didn't elaborate further. The next day, as Tim waited in the lobby, he thought Gilnariz would arrive soon. Just then, a man called out to him and said that the chairman wanted a cup of tea. Tim took the teacup and went to deliver it, thinking as he went that he should do something to thank her. However, later that day, just as he was about to leave, a boy kicked the teacup out of Tim's hand. It shattered. The boy, speaking loudly and deliberately so everyone around could hear, accused Tim of taking the president's teacup without permission and breaking it. Tim was stunned by the accusation and quickly defended himself, saying he didn't mean to do it. Nia appeared and remarked that this was a serious matter, while others chimed in agreement, saying that Tim had damaged the chairman's property. Just then, Gilnariz appeared, asking what was causing the commotion. Nia pointed out that the guildmaster had arrived, and Tim noticed that her outfit today looked more formal than usual. Unfortunately, this wasn't a mission day, and he broke her cup. Gilnariz replied that it was just an ordinary cup, and that everything would be fine if Tim wasn't hurt. However, Tim was still trembling with anxiety. Nia spoke up, asserting that this was a major issue and reminding everyone of the society's rule number 12. The rules state that anyone who takes or damages the guildmaster's property will be expelled. This means Tim must leave the guild. Gilnariz explained that the cup was less important than the treasures and forbidden books she was protecting. But Nia countered, pointing out that even the teacups were the head of the council's property, and therefore the rules still applied. Gilnariz agreed, reminding everyone that the managers, who rarely made appearances, had gathered together. and the fact that the cup shattered appears to have been caused by great force, possibly related to wind magic. She asked Naya if she had considered that possibility. Naya, confused, asked what she meant. Then they simply suggested removing Tim to solve the problem. Tim, feeling weighed down, thought to himself that he was about to be deported without ever having had the chance to become a real adventurer. Gilnerise, noticing his despair, sarcastically remarked that his pride was ridiculous. But then, with a touch of regret, she apologized. She said that, as the president, she was forced to expel him. Tim was stunned, collapsing to the floor in shock. A boy standing nearby thanked Gilnerise for her decision, noting that he had been worried about the headmistress having to handle small tasks like cooking all by herself. Tim, feeling utterly defeated, thought it was all over. He was just doing menial tasks and had no excuse left. Unexpectedly, Gilnerise announced that she would be leaving the society to follow Tim. Everyone was stunned by the statement, wondering what nonsense she was spouting. A chairman cannot simply leave the association without resolving all the issues. Calmly, she declared that she would leave behind all her treasures and possessions. Naya, confused, asked what she said. Gilnerise explained that she was referring to her sacred treasure and her other treasures, and that she was now entrusting them to Naya. Naya, clearly impressed, remarked that they were wonderful. Gilnerise then revealed that her sacred treasure was called Nirvana. She continued to remove her treasures and belongings. Naya pointed out that the ring on her finger was still there. Gilnerise replied that it wasn't a treasure, just a ring with a red stone. Nia then suggested that if it wasn't a treasure, she should leave it behind. Then Naya thanked her for her youthful innocence and stopped calling her president and ordered her to leave the society immediately. As Tim and Gilnerise walked outside, Tim asked why she had done that. Gilnerise reassured him, saying not to worry. The society had ended a long time ago. That's why she left. She said that now they needed to find a place to live and start a new journey. Tim couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't need to do that just for him. While she was resting, he offered to go find something to eat and suggested she rest at a nearby inn. While she was resting, Tim thought that she shouldn't be around someone like him. Tim made a promise to himself that he would reclaim the guild for Gilnerise. He sought out Nia, who had now become the new guild master. Tim knelt before him, begging him to return the guild to Gilnerise. Nia merely gave a wry smile and replied that it was futile, no matter how many times Tim pleaded. With Nirvana in his possession, he no longer needed Gilnerise. However, Nia seemed pleased that this moment had finally arrived. He took out a box and said that, even though he had left the judge behind, he was still having trouble getting rid of it. Tim realized it was the lunchbox Gilnerise had made for him. Nia casually tossed the lunchbox aside, saying he could throw it away now. When Tim inspected the food inside, Nia commented that it looked no different from animal feed. Tim tasted it and thought about how Gilnerise had made this dish for him. The flavor was sweet and delicate, imbued with her love and care. Then Naya took Gilnerise's ring and threw it away, saying that he might throw that away too. He scoffed, saying it was baffling that Gilnerise would send such a ridiculous item. As Naya was about to crush the ring under her feet, Tim yelled, telling him to stop. Naya, noticing Tim's anger, smirked and said, "You want to beat him up, right?" Then, before Tim could react, Nia punched him in the face, saying that's how he should fight if he wanted to get anything back. Naya asked him if he intended to follow his orders and told him to feel free to resist if he wanted to. He even sarcastically remarked that if Tim thought he could only be a henchman, then he'd better accept it. After saying that, Nia hit Tim hard, causing him to fall to the ground, but he still glared at him. Nia, angered by Tim's attitude, calls him insolent and asks if it's necessary to wipe that arrogance out of him. As Nia prepared to poke her finger in Tim's eye, Swordmaster Ganesh intervened, stopping them and saying that Tim had suffered enough. Ganesh carried Tim away, telling Naya that he would handle the matter. Naya, displeased, ordered that Tim be deported from the country. Ganesh ignored them and brought Tim, now severely wounded, to Gilnerise. Upon seeing Tim's condition, Gilnerise turned pale with worry. Ganesh helped Tim lie down on the bed and explained that he had been fighting with Nia. Gilnerise, confused and not understanding why Tim did that, she noticed her ring on his hand. The sight filled her with emotion, realizing that Tim had brought it back. Then, Ganesh quietly left, leaving them alone. Sometime later, Tim woke up. Tim was astonished to find that all his wounds had completely healed. He noticed Gilnerise sitting beside him, dozing off near his bed. Tim understood that it was her healing magic that had helped him recover. He also saw the ring in her palm and realized she no longer wore it. Tim gently took the ring and put it back on Gilnerise's finger, whispering that he would become a great explorer, and I hope you will follow his journey. The scene then shifts to the gathering. Naya was being congratulated by someone for being appointed the new president. Naya, appearing indifferent, brushed off the compliment and asked what the person wanted. He said they needed to find someone to replace Tim. Nia replied that they could manage without Tim. But the boy objected, saying that Tim was the only one who handled all the chores, and without him, the whole group would fall into chaos. Naya was stunned to learn that Tim had single-handedly taken on the responsibility of caring for 1,000 members of the organization. The scene shifts back to Gilnerise, where she tells Tim that she has a favor to ask of him. Tim was delighted to hear this and eagerly asked what it was. Gilnerise explained that the inn charged extra for using the bathroom, but they were almost out of money. She asked if Tim could handle this for her. Tim hesitated slightly, replying that it might be difficult, but Gilnerise insisted. Finally, Tim used his laundry skills to clean Gilnerise, making her look like she had just taken a bath. The results surprised and delighted Gilnerise. She felt refreshed and even noticed an improvement in her health. Tim explained that he had eliminated toxins, bacteria, waste products, and even adverse conditions like poisoning or curses, treating them all as mere dirt. Gilnerise, astonished, asked if it was really that simple, that curses and weakened states were just dirt. She smiled gratefully, thanked Tim, and said that thanks to him, the adventurers would never get sick, and could even use cursed weapons with ease. Tim humbly replied that he couldn't heal wounds, so what he did couldn't be as impressive as Gilnerise's magic. Then he mentioned that he would go prepare breakfast. Gilnerise asked about the ingredients, but Tim reassured her, saying not to worry, he could use the society's archives so everything would be fine. Gilnerise was confused by this. Tim immediately used his organization skill and produced a large quantity of food, along with plates and bottles of wine, to serve. This astonished Gilnerise. She asked if he had the ability to control space. Tim was also surprised by the question. He replied that it was just basic cleaning. He was simply rearranging things. Then Tim asked her what she wanted to eat. Gilnerise suggested hamburgers. Tim agreed and assured them that they would be delicious, juicy hamburgers. He began preparing the dish using his cooking skills. While waiting for food, he used his sewing skills to create a towel and a pillow. Place them on the table so she can sit comfortably. Everything only took 3 seconds, and Tim thanked her for waiting. When the hamburgers were ready, he brought them out to serve. Tim carried the hamburgers to Gilnerise. She stared at the food, wondering how the hamburger could have looked so delicious in such a short amount of time. Tim calmly mentioned that he had regularly prepared thousands of meals, and that's why he could cook so quickly. Gilnerise was astonished to hear that he had prepared thousands of meals. Tim then asked her what she wanted to drink. Gilnerise ordered orange juice. He agreed and used his cooking skills. Take the oranges, squeeze the juice, and mix, and served in a glass. Gilnerise was completely overwhelmed by his skill. Tim noticed her reaction and asked if something was wrong. He also pointed out that the orange juice had been chilled. He explained that it was a freezing cooking method combined with his cooking skills. Gilnerise blushed at his explanation. Then Tim sat down opposite her to eat with her. He told himself that even if it was just a chance encounter, he was actually sharing a meal with Gilnerise. Gilnerise suggested they eat before the food got cold. Tim agreed, and they both enjoyed their meal. Tim then asked her if they were planning to go on an adventure. And have you recovered the guild's treasure stone along with her personal belongings yet? Gilnerise replied that it was all right because she had never lost anything. Everything had been given away voluntarily. As she sat on the bed, she gestured for Tim to sit down beside her. Tim hesitated for a moment, but then sat down next to her. Gilnerise explained that the organization was named after her, which is quite rare. She emphasized that it's not common for organizations to name themselves after their leaders. Tim agreed, noting that this almost never happens in other organizations. Gilnerise then began to tell a story from her past. She recounted that she had displayed magical talents from a very young age, attracting adventurers from all over the world. Thanks to her powers, the number of adventurers increased, and before she knew it, they had formed a guild. Eventually, she was chosen as its leader, which is why the guild is named after her. She recounted that she always wanted to see happy faces around her, so she took on many tasks and collected many rare items. However, one day, she realized something that worried her. She overheard some adventurers calling her a tool for obtaining rare items. Gilnerise told Tim that many people joined her group simply because they were interested in her power and abilities. The dinner party she canceled to join Tim on his adventure was merely a ploy to lure them into using her powers for their own purposes. Gilnerise is currently focused solely on fighting power, showing no compassion or concern for the other members. She also notices how badly they treat Tim. Tim, surprised, asks if she notices how they treat him. She replied that she had noticed him and realized the bullying. If he had spoken up, she could have helped, but when she called him, he started begging. Tim wanted to understand why she called him. In such a cruel place, she was the only one who truly saw who he was. She called him just to thank him. Tim also thanked her for sharing her story. He said that he wasn't seeking revenge, but she wouldn't forgive anyone who insulted her. Gilnerise laughed and said that just seeing him angry was enough for her. She suggested they work together gradually to become great adventurers and show the guild members what they were truly capable of. Tim agreed excitedly and looked at her with expectant eyes. She remarked that he was truly different. Tim replied that he was very happy that she was pleased. He then said he would make her a more comfortable outfit suitable for an adventurer. She was currently wearing a beautiful outfit, but he thought it wasn't appropriate for an adventure. Tim thought for a moment about the outfit, and in just 30 seconds, she felt his skills far exceeded her expectations. She then used her identification skills to learn more about the outfit and discovered that it was a powerful item. Tim responded that she didn't need to overestimate it. Gilnerise remarked that Tim had created such powerful items for adventurers. Tim shrugged and explained that he didn't spend 30 minutes on each of the thousands of outfits he'd sent her, but only made them in their basic form. She asked what if the suits were made temporarily, and Tim replied that they would fall apart after a day, but he would make custom outfits for each mission and send them out every morning, so it was fine if they were in a temporary state. She took note of this, and from that day on, the guild would go on adventures without his costume. She laughed and said that the guild wouldn't last even a week. They thought they were accomplishing the missions using their own strength, but in reality, it was all thanks to his powerful suit customized for each mission. Upon hearing this, Tim felt extremely emotional. Gilnerise asked him if something was wrong. Tim felt overwhelmed with happiness. He hadn't realized how wonderful it could be to be recognized. He then said that he would work even harder at the guild from now on. Nia is reviewing the tasks. He said they could easily replace the odd jobs. He felt that Tim and Gilnerise would have difficulty with food. According to reports, their guild had the fewest injuries and the highest mission completion rate, so they didn't need young girls or boys. He wondered why an elite guild would hire useless people with no combat skills, and who was in charge of recruitment. After checking, he discovered that the person in charge was Ganache. The scene shifts to Tim and Gilnerise, the innkeeper who demands 1,500 sol per night. Tim agreed to pay. Gilnerise apologized to Tim, explaining that she'd rushed out with only the clothes on her back. Tim replied that it was okay, as they still had money. The innkeeper then asked if the two were eloping together. Gilnerise blushed at the question. Tim quickly clarified that it wasn't like that. However, the man went on to say how sweet it was to see young lovers. Then he asked if Gilnaries was an actress, and if the boy was a servant in the mansion, and whether their love was forbidden by class, leading them to elope. Tim repeated that this was not the case. But the man wouldn't listen. After giving them some money, he told them to hide somewhere the mansion wouldn't find them, and instructed them to give the letter to the head merchant at the east gate. If it was a letter of introduction from Chris, the man said the guards would escort them to the neighboring Linhart kingdom. Tim tried to explain that wasn't the case, but the man just told him not to come back home. Gilnaries' face flushed red when she called Tim. Tim asked her what was wrong, and she replied that it was the death stare. With the letter of recommendation and the money in hand, they both left. Tim told Gilnaries that with this letter of recommendation, they could go to the Linhart kingdom. She said that the guild might recognize Tim's potential and would pursue them, so leaving the empire might be a smart decision. Tim agreed, saying it was unlikely, but that someone might recognize Gilnaries' face. She nodded, acknowledging that it was possible. Then she asked if they really intended to elope together. Tim apologized and admitted that he hadn't heard Gilnaries' question clearly, then asked if she could repeat it. She gave a strange smile and said there was nothing to worry about. More importantly, he could only imagine the shock on the other side. Tim assured her that it was okay. They could go by themselves. Gilnaries went on to say that while there might be joy, she suspected there would be sadness. Tim said he would be happy if that were true. Meanwhile, Chris was wondering if Tim and Gilnaries had arrived at the East Gate yet. At that moment, a woman called out to him and asked if he could come and see the room where the couple had stayed the previous night. Chris went to check and found the room very clean, wondering what had happened. The woman asked if he could believe it, remarking that the room seemed to have transformed into a royal suite overnight. She wondered if those two were house spirits or something similar. Tim told Gilnaries that he had now seen the East Gate, and the ultimate adventure is about to begin. She suggests they start with a gathering quest. Tim reiterated that his fighting skills were still weak. She reassured him that it was all right, because the recruitment exam included a combat skills test, and since Tim passed it, it proves he also possesses a certain level of combat ability. Tim replied that if that were the case, the winner of the recruitment process was Ganache. He had to battle a terrible hangover and spent the entire morning glued to the toilet, so he was unable to take the test. Ultimately, it all came down to flipping a coin, and the result was heads. When Tim asked Ganache about this, Ganache said that his vision was distorted, and he couldn't clearly see which side of the coin it was. Tim pointed out that it was the backside, but Ganache, with a smug smile, said that his true genius allowed him to see the front, and that was the real victory. Tim didn't fully understand what Ganache said, but he knew he had passed the exam. Gilnaries laughed and said that Ganache's words were nonsense. But at least it helped her meet Tim. She thanked Ganache for his hard work, even if it was a little delusional. However, they still needed to speak to Ganache. She ran to greet the officer in charge, only to avoid the mission she had bet on. She guessed that the other adventurers had also been chosen randomly. And that means the truth behind the so-called elite guild is that they delegate menial tasks to others, while keeping their main responsibilities to themselves. However, Nia thinks their guild is absolutely brilliant and can't wait to hear reports on the day's completed missions. Tim told Gilnaries that it was ridiculous, to which she replied that she was just like Ganache. No matter what the world or Tim thinks, even if they believe she's just a facade, she believes that Tim is the one who truly shines. Then she asked if that wasn't what the traveling merchant had said about Tim. Tim suggested they take a short walk. They approached a coachman and handed him Chris's letter of recommendation. The coachman smiled and said that Chris was a good man. Then they asked if they really intended to go back to that dilapidated house. He allowed Tim and Gilnaries into the car, but warned that the journey wouldn't be smooth. They only transport goods, so speed is prioritized over comfort. Gilnerize remarked that the journey looked like it would be very bumpy. She even joked that if she accidentally fell and had to hug Tim tightly, she would understand why. Tim reassured her that he might be a little unreliable, but told her to hold on tight. The driver introduced himself as Rock and asked if Gilnerize was the lost princess. She introduced herself as Gilnerize and asked him to call her Gil, saying that she was now under his service. Tim also introduced himself. Then I thought that Rock's thinking made sense, because Gilnerize looked like a princess. So it was natural to think that way. Gilnerize asked him if something was wrong. Tim replied that it was nothing, just that he thought if the outfit were a little simpler, it wouldn't stand out so much. She reassured him not to worry, because she really loved the outfit and the striking purple color was perfect. Then she asked him if he was a fan of purple. Tim agrees, and Gilnerize showed him her hair. He immediately recognized it as the same color as the purple she had just mentioned. She said she would definitely remember this shade of purple forever. Rock announced that they were ready to leave. Tim seemed to remember something, and Gilnerize asked him what he was thinking about. Tim asked Rock if they could wait a little while. Rock, curious, asked what he was planning to do. Gilnerize quickly understood, and Tim explained that it all involved sewing. Tim then made some pillows for everyone and handed them out to each person. They said they would be very useful throughout the journey. Rock was surprised, commenting that they could also be used for crafting, and remarked that Tim's sewing skills were impressive. Tim humbly replied that he was nothing special. The others were delighted to receive such soft pillows, with one person even praising them as wonderful. Rock said that traveling by carriage could be very inconvenient, so having a pillow was a real lifesaver. Tim was glad everyone liked them. Then Gilnerize thought about reducing stress. He whispered something into Tim's ear. She said that with his skills, he could probably do even better. Tim blushed when he heard her say that. He agreed. A curious man wondered what Tim would come up with next. Rock asked Tim what kind of trick he was up to now. Tim made a pillow in the shape of a cat. Gilnerize beamed at the sight of it and exclaimed how adorable it was, calling it a chubby, protective cat pillow. She added that it's a well-known fact that cats have healing abilities, and this pillow would warm people's hearts and relieve stress. Gilnerize asked him if that was true, and he agreed. I thought to myself that she really loves cats. Gilnerize stretched out the arm of the cat pillow and said that it was not only adorable. When you pull it out and wrap it around your waist to sit, you will feel more comfortable. Hearing that, everyone burst into laughter. She asked why they were laughing. Rock asked why the cat had stretchy arms. He didn't quite understand, but he thought it was amazing. He also called it the Chubby Cat Protective Pillow and suggested shortening the name to CCSC. Gilnerize asked if it was a good idea. Rock asked if it was okay for Tim to give everyone one. Tim replied that they just needed to use them. That was the little he could do. Rock thanked him and said they would arrive in the kingdom of Linhart after an overnight journey. So he suggested everyone get in the car. Tim thanked him, and the group continued their journey for some time. Tim saw the East Gate in the distance and realized how far away it was. He thought about how he would become the greatest explorer. It had been 3 years since he left home, and he recalled the moment his sister Ari nearly burst into tears. He wondered if his brothers and father had forgotten him, calling him a failure, labeling him useless, and only assigned him menial tasks. However, those tasks had their own value. He bid farewell to the Cynthia Empire, his father's empire. He was no longer a prince or errand boy. Now, he will surely become the greatest explorer, proving his worth to his father's family and those who abandoned him. As they continued their journey, night fell. Gilnerize noticed his mood and decided to talk to him understandingly and apologize. He reassured her that everything was all right and told her she could lean on him if she wanted to. She agreed, but only if he insisted. Then she rested her head on his shoulder. He thought about showing a stronger side of himself. But Gilnerize remarked that he was so soft and fragrant, wondering if it was heaven. He replied that he had used fabric softener on the clothes, and because of the long journey, he told her to sleep comfortably. Rock looked back and said they were halfway there and should take a break. Tim replied that he was fine and suggested checking on the other merchants. However, Rock pointed out that thanks to those pillows, everyone felt comfortable and advised them to continue their journey to the kingdom of Linhart without stopping. At that very moment, they were attacked with arrows. Rock shouted that it was a bandit attack, and the carriage began to tip over. He advised everyone to jump out and roll to safety. Gilnerise quickly pulled Tim away and created a magical shield to protect both of them. She apologized for letting her guard down. Tim thought to himself that she had pulled him up in the blink of an eye and created a magical shield. Then he asked about the others. Rock was surprised to see all the pillows transform and now cover everyone. Gilnerise realized it was the protective feature of the pillows. She thought it would be dangerous if they fell out of the car, but the pillows had transformed into a suit of armor, protecting their bodies from any impact. As Tim had predicted, the pillows had kept all the merchants safe. Upon seeing the robbers, Gilnerise announced that she would deal with them. She was still holding Tim and thanking him. He asked if she could put him down. She replied that it would be dangerous for him to leave her side, so they would fight like this. Tim felt embarrassed being protected by a princess. Gilnerise pulled his face close to her body, telling him not to leave at this moment. Tim felt a strange, mixed sensation. One of the robbers fired a flare. He said he had targeted the small caravan with a magical attack, thinking they were defenseless. However, he didn't expect them to have a mage with them. The horses had run away, meaning they would no longer be able to escape. He ordered his accomplices to drop the goods and disappear. When the robbers surrounded Gilnerise and Tim, she declared that they were the ones who should disappear. She cast a lightning spell, stunning them all. One robber wondered how she could use lightning magic without chanting a spell. Another concluded that she must be a high-level sorceress. The gang leader ordered his accomplices to stop hesitating, saying that the sorcerer was no problem nearby, so they should attack immediately. However, Gilnerise confidently stated that previously, she might be slow, but now she's much faster. Thanks to the outfit Tim made for her, Gilnerise moved so fast that it astonished the robbers. She laughed and teased them, saying they were too slow and would never be able to hit her, while holding Tim tightly. Tim struggled to breathe and said that she was hurting him. He thought to himself that the situation was terrible, and although the attacks all missed, but something else got hit. He felt a strange sensation, and when Gilnerise saw Tim's nose bleeding, she frowned and told the robbers that she didn't know what they had done to him. But how could they dare hurt him? She then created a giant magic circle in the sky, unnerving the robbers. She warned that it was insane to challenge her and ordered them to retreat. She added that they should never come near her again. As the robbers fled, Gilnerise asked Tim if he was all right and offered to treat him. Tim reassured her that he was fine and then apologized for the situation. Rock then said that they really had to thank both of them, because it was thanks to their efforts that the goods and the merchants were safe. Tim humbly replied that it was all thanks to everyone who wore the cushions he made. Rock told Gilnerise that he had never seen such powerful magic. She replied that she only used magic to ensure Tim wasn't hurt and that he needed to be more careful in the next battle. Tim reassured her not to worry. But then he noticed his blood had stained her dress red. Tim quickly used his abilities to clean the blood stain from Gilnerise's dress. She thanked him, but he couldn't help but notice a hint of disappointment on her face. Rock remarked that the carriage was completely damaged, and it would take them 3 days of walking to reach the kingdom of Linhart. Gilnerise suggested they walk there. Rock agreed, saying it was the only option. One person in the group pointed out they couldn't carry all the goods, so they would have to leave some behind. Another added that their livelihood depended on those items. However, Rock remained optimistic, saying that what mattered was that they were all alive. Tim thought to himself that despite the difficult situation, Rock's optimism was impressive. He then told the group not to worry, as he could carry all the goods and parts of the horse-drawn cart. They laughed, one asking how he planned to do it, another questioning whether Tim was even considering himself strong enough to carry all that stuff. Tim simply used his organizational skills. It made all the furniture disappear, astonishing everyone. He reassured them not to worry, explaining that he had stored everything in another space and could retrieve it any time. Tim went on to say that they should have done it that way from the beginning and apologized for mistreating the horse. Gilnerise remarked that his skill was truly awe-inspiring and unusual. Rock agreed, saying Tim was amazing, and he even thought Tim might be very impressive in Gilnerise's eyes. Tim humbly replied that it was just a small skill. Gilnerise turned to Rock and confirmed that he was right, then proudly showed off the outfit Tim had made for her. Tim asked her to wait a moment. He thought to himself that both of them understood how to compliment others. He felt motivated to do his best, as if spurred on by the admiration from Gilnerise and Rock. Rock then mentioned that thanks to Tim, the luggage issue had been resolved. But now they face a food problem. They might have to travel to the kingdom of Linhall without food, possibly enduring 3 days without food or water. One man remarked that it would be very difficult for them. Another agreed, saying it was stressful, but there was no other option. Tim reassured everyone that everything would be all right and revealed that he happened to have enough food for 1,000 people. Rock curiously asked Tim what he intended to say about the food supply for 100 people. Tim suggested they make use of it and suggested they eat amela. Then he cleared the table and began to take out enough food for all 30 people. Gilnerise asked in surprise if she could eat a rice ball. Rock was curious too, wondering what kind of magic Tim was using. He joked that Tim might even conjure up a bathtub and a bed. Tim apologized and explained that he couldn't prepare the bath. Rock laughed and admitted he was just joking. But then Tim surprised everyone by saying he could provide beds for them. Rock was astonished. If Tim could really do that, it would be crazy. He asked if they could have a huge sandwich. Tim agreed and asked everyone to order one. When Tim thought about the sandwich, he knew exactly what he was going to do. A thick bun with 2 hamburger patties, cheese, lettuce, chopped onions, and plenty of ketchup. He also sliced potatoes into sticks and fried them, sprinkling some salt on top, perfect for dipping in ketchup. Regarding drinks, Tim uses a grayish-white mineral water. He has the ability to analyze the composition and properties of all kinds of rocks. So he made a drink from this type of ice, grinding it into powder, then mix it with lemon juice and water to create a carbonated soda. After combining all the ingredients, the drink is ready. Tim doesn't serve burgers, fries, and soda right away. Instead, he handed Rock a plate. Rock remarked that the dish looked quite unusual, surely something Tim had just created. Tim reassured him not to worry, asserting that he hadn't been careless in his preparation. Rock took a deep breath, the aroma filling the air, and remarked that it was wonderful. However, the dark, frothy drink looked a little scary. But Rock trusted Tim and was eager to try. Rock decided to start with the drink. Just as he was about to take a sip, Tim warned that it was a little unusual. Rock immediately spat out, his mouth burning, and asked Tim what he did. Tim calmly replied that he hadn't done anything special, he just needed time to get used to it. Rock, still cautious, asked if it was poison. Tim insisted it wasn't. And after taking another slow sip, Rock realized that it was actually very delicious. Encouraged by that, the others asked if they could have something similar. Tim agreed, telling them he would make it with teriyaki sauce. One person admitted they didn't know much about cuisine, and another wasn't sure what to order. Tim asked them to simply state their preferences. One person requested a spicy dish, another wanted a dish with meat, and a third requested ice cream with lots of vegetables. Tim served everyone according to their request and encouraged them to feel free to ask for more if they wanted. While eating, one person remarked that they had never tasted anything so delicious. The whole group expressed their gratitude, thanking Tim for the wonderful meal. Tim felt a little emotional. Tim bowed his head to thank them. Rock laughed and asked why Tim was thanking them. Tim told himself that he was genuinely surprised by their joy, especially since he rarely received praise at the guild. Then he turned to Gilnerise and asked if she had made up her mind. She pondered whether she should order a drink, but then imagined Tim stepping on it barefoot, imbuing it with his essence. She quickly dismissed the thought and decided not to ask. When Tim called her, she asked for some time to think. The next scene shifts back to the guild. Naya approached a man and asked where the guild stored its food because he couldn't find the storage facility. The boy replied that he didn't know, that he had only been given the task by Tim. Nia commented that the only name the boy seemed to mention was Tim. At this time, a group of adventurers returned. Naya told the boy to wait and see the results achieved by the guild's outstanding members. A wounded adventurer staggered forward and said the journey had been terrible. Nia asked what had happened. The man explained that during the mission, most of their teammates had been defeated, and they were in a state of complete collapse. He reported that almost all of the explorers were seriously injured and the situation was critical. They cried for help, some felt as though they were about to die. A young woman, her voice trembling, pointed to serious injuries and asked to be taken to a medical station. Other explorers also called for help, asking where they could find medicine. Naya muttered about bad luck, mentioning that he had just been appointed team leader. Then he asked what had happened. One boy replied that it was strange. One explorer was torn apart by a dragon, another was burned alive, and a third was merely trampled. Naya told the boy to wait and said that wounds like that could have killed anyone. The boy denied it, explaining that their defensive abilities had protected them, even while wearing Tim's tattered explorer suit. Naya looked at the boy's outfit and asked, "What is this?" The boy explained that it was the 2-day outfit Tim had made yesterday. He said that Tim's clothes usually fall apart after only 1 day. But at least the other adventurers should have decent equipment bought from the shop. Naya was surprised to hear about Tim. The boy went on to say that explorers always get injured on their missions, and they desperately need more healers. Naya wondered if they were the ones holding the organization back. Then he called Ganesh and asked why none of the executives were involved in high-level assignments. Ganesh apologized, saying he had earned too much money and now needed some. Naya, enraged, yelled at him, angry that Ganesh had been drinking instead of focusing on his duties. A woman called out to Naya, asking for help with the injured. Naya rudely refused her request, even calling them useless. Despite their pleas, she insisted that they would die without help. Ganesh intervened, telling Naya that he could heal them all at once, by using the divine item Nirvana that he had obtained. When the girl heard this, she knelt before Naya, begging him to use the divine artifact to heal the adventurers. However, Naya kicked her, causing her to fall to the ground. The explorers were then learning of Nirvana's healing power, and many of them expressed hope that Naya would use it. Someone mentioned seeing Naya taking an item from Gilnerize. This implies that Naya could help them at this moment. He recounted a story from many years ago when Gilnerize was attacked and used Nirvana to save everyone. Desperate, they both begged Naya to use it. Ganesh sensed the pressure mounting, and if Naya refuses, things will only get worse. Naya replied that it was impossible. If someone like Gilnerize had used it, then he could do it too. Finally, Naya took the item and tried to use it. He intends to activate a large-scale healing spell. However, when he tried, the magic spell cannot be activated. Naya then lied, claiming the item was fake. Hearing this, one of the adventurers scoffed, saying perhaps it would be better for them to die. The girl refused to give up, encouraging them to continue fighting for their lives, explaining that they were mobilizing all available treatment options. She even instructed the doctors to continue working until their mana ran out. The girl begged Naya for help again. Naya coldly replied that he wouldn't waste his magic on such trivial matters. She realized that the bandages and antiseptic had run out. I thought to myself, if Tim were here, everything would be resolved smoothly. Ganesh gave her the sacred artifact Nirvana, encouraging her to use it. He suggested that perhaps she could activate it, though Naya refused. She hesitated, lacking confidence that she could do it. Ganesh reassured her, saying she wouldn't know the result unless she tried. Just flip the coin and see, he encouraged. After some hesitation, she decided to give it a try. Naya stood watching, scoffing disdainfully. What good does it do to use a fake sacred artifact? But she didn't give up. She took Nirvana in her hands and burst into tears. They earnestly begged it to heal the wounded adventurers. Instantly, Nirvana shone brightly, leaving Naya stunned. She heard a voice telling her to get up, not to lie there anymore, because everyone would be worried. She turned to Ganesh and said that she had just heard a voice, but Ganesh couldn't hear anything. She realized that the voice was only speaking to her. She recognized the voice as coming from Nirvana. The voice instructed her to listen carefully, telling her that to activate the area of effect healing spell, she needed to concentrate and shout Ruby Nirvana. It also warned her not to stammer or mispronounce the words, because that wouldn't be cool. She agreed. Determined, they lifted Nirvana high and shouted, Ruby Nirvana! The moment she did that, a wave of healing light swept through her. Restore all adventurers. Seeing them recover filled her with happiness. The adventurers called her goddess, thanking her for saving their lives. Naya, still trembling, wondered to herself how a low-level mage like herself could have performed such a miracle. Ganesh remarked that the girl seemed to be above Nia in rank. Nia angrily retorted, "Don't talk nonsense." But the other adventurers gathered, pointing out that the girl had used a divine weapon, something even Nia couldn't control. They reminded them that while Nia had abandoned them, this girl had stepped up to help. Naya, trying to regain control of the situation, asked everyone to calm down and asked if the other groups had returned. Ganesh replied, remarking that Naya had been too arrogant to send everyone on high-level missions. If they don't come back, it will prove that the managers aren't as good as Nia thought. As he spoke, Ganesh toyed with a stone. Naya recognized it as a heart stone and asked if Ganesh was shirking his responsibilities. Ganesh replied nonchalantly that he was only writing a mission report. Then Ganesh turned to the girl and asked her name. She introduced herself as Fiona. Fiona explained that she had just killed an A-rank adamant turtle and obtained its heart stone. She said she intended to give the stone to the guild master. At that moment, Ganesh announced that Fiona would now be their new president. Fiona was surprised, and the other adventurers surprisingly agreed with the decision. Naya immediately intervened, asking everyone to calm down and asserting that Fiona was not qualified to be president. Fiona herself was stunned and didn't know how to react. However, Ganesh told her that if she became president, she might be able to help Tim someday. Hearing this, Fiona thought about Tim and realized that all this time, she has always been the one receiving help. It's time for her to stand up and lead. Ganesh noticed the determination in her eyes and remarked that she had the right mindset for leadership. Fiona nodded, agreeing to do her best. Naya angrily shouted, telling everyone to be quiet. He insisted that he was still the chairman. In a fit of rage, Nia unleashed a magical attack aimed directly at Fiona. However, Ganesh stepped in front of Fiona, blocking the attack with his bare hands. Blood dripped from his palms as Ganesh turned to look at Nia, asking if she really wanted him to decapitate him. Naya was stunned, scoffing in disbelief, saying that it was impossible for Ganesh to block wind magic with just his bare hands. But Ganesh, remaining calm, shifted into an attacking stance and coldly declared that Nia was the fool here. If Nia continues spouting nonsense, he'll gladly chop off his head. Nia, now truly terrified, they hastily fled the scene. Fiona saw blood on Ganesh's hand and asked him to show her the wound. She quickly healed him using her magic. When thanking Ganesh, Fiona stated that she had made a decision. The organization will be renamed and will focus on social contribution activities, such as doing odd jobs to save lives or providing security. One worried boy spoke up, saying it might be too much since they were adventurers. Fiona replied firmly that the decision was final. She asked everyone to recognize how many times they had been helped along their journey. She understood that everyone had their own thoughts. But for now, she asked everyone to return to their rooms and reflect on who had inspired them to become adventurers. Ganesh observed the situation and commented that the Adventurers Club was gradually turning into a rescue center. Fiona turned to him and asked if that would help Tim. Ganesh nodded in agreement. Fiona later shared that she had mustered up the courage to meet Tim. They even talked to each other, and Tim mentioned someone he wanted to beat. Ganesh, curious, asked her to tell him everything in detail. Fiona hesitated, replying that she couldn't reveal Tim's circumstances. Ganesh continued to press the matter, jokingly asking if she would hold Tim's hand when she visited him. Fiona was surprised, not expecting him to think that way. At that moment, Nirvana's voice rang out, asking her what she thought of Tim. The scene shifts to Tim and the others. Tim tells Gilnerise that it feels like he just defeated a slime. Gilnerise shook her head, denying it. She said that if he got covered in slime, it wouldn't just be a feeling. She would go crazy. Tim asked about the small loopers, confused as they seemed to be low-level monsters. Gilnerise retorted sharply, saying that if those tentacles wrapped around him, she would truly lose her mind. Tim understood her meaning and panicked, fearing that her warning would come true. As they continued on their way, Tim told himself he had to take down a few weak monsters before reaching the kingdom of Linhart. He hoped to protect the merchants and Gilnerise. Upon spotting a single-eyed flying monster, he told Gilnerise that he wanted to take it down. However, Gilnerise refused, saying it was too dangerous and she would handle it herself. This scene repeated itself many times. Gilnerise always steps in between Tim and the monsters. Tim apologized, saying he had left the entire fight to her. Gilnerise reassured him not to worry, but Tim couldn't help but notice that the monsters seemed to be constantly drawn to him. He admitted that for some reason, all the monsters were charging straight at him. Gilnerise chuckled softly and remarked that perhaps it was because he looked delicious. Tim asked if that was the case and admitted that he wanted to be stronger so he could defend himself. Gilnerise replied that there was no need to rush and suggested they start gathering herbs. Tim refused, saying that if he couldn't contribute to the battle, he would feel useless. Gilnerise raised an eyebrow and reminded him that she had always been there for him all this time. At that moment, Tim turned to the others and asked if they were feeling tired from walking continuously. Rock replied that he felt very well, thanks to the merchant's boots that Tim made for them. Tim smiled and told Rock to let him know if anything was too difficult. Gilnerise, worried, asked if Tim was okay and offered to carry him if he felt tired. Tim blushed and quickly told her not to joke around. Gilnerise suggested Tim carry her instead of the other way around. Tim thought for a moment. Then suddenly, blood started flowing from his nose. Joan immediately became worried, realizing this was happening again. Tim quickly apologized, saying that a lowly person like him had no right to carry anyone, but he could carry her instead. Rock, clearly confused, wondered what they were talking about as it made no sense to him at all. Finally, they arrived at the kingdom of Linhart. While Rock felt relaxed and relieved to have arrived, the rest weren't very happy. They still craved Tim's cooking and wanted to sleep in his cozy bed again. Rock encouraged everyone to get up. Then, in a serious tone, he handed Tim a reward as a thank you gift for saving their lives. He said that the amount might not be enough, but that was all they had. Tim politely declined, explaining that the merchants had even lost their horses, so they would be in trouble from now on. Rock expressed his admiration for Tim and Gilnerise, saying he had never met such incredible people. Tim, on the other hand, praised Rock, calling him amazing. Rock humbly replied that he hadn't done anything special. Tim smiled and said that Rock's smile was the best thing about him. Tim thought about their journey, the bandit attacks, the lost horses, and the lack of food. But despite it all, Rock had maintained a positive attitude. Rock's smile kept everyone's spirits high. Meanwhile, Tim, full of skepticism, struggled to maintain his cheerful demeanor. Just then, a girl called Tim over. First, they praised him, saying he was very reliable and cool. Then another girl added that it was thanks to Tim that their journey had been enjoyable and fulfilling, calling him really cute. They invited Tim to join them. But before he could answer, Gilnerise rushed over, grabbed his hand, and pulled him away. As they were leaving, Rock called back, asking that he at least be allowed to thank them properly. Then he gave each of them a ticket. He explained that in this country there was an expedition guild called Deflia, where they could use tickets to check the status of magical devices there. Tim hesitated, remarking that the tickets might be expensive. Rock reassured him, saying that they were a gift and the merchants didn't really need them. He advised Tim and Gilnerise not to hesitate to accept them. Tim then told them to feel free to use the pillows and shoes he had made for them. Rock held Tim's hand. He said with determination, "One day, I will become the greatest businessman to conquer all of Asia. If you need any help, just contact me." "Thank you all and good luck." Tim felt encouraged by their words. Gilnarise, full of enthusiasm, asked if they were ready to leave and make a name for themselves. She added that with Tim's true strength yet unknown to the world, they would rise as adventurers and amaze everyone. However, Tim still hesitated, as he couldn't use a sword or magic, and his skills were limited to menial tasks, but he vowed to rise above it, believing he could do it. And this was the time for the underdog to step up. Both of them joined the association, and Gilnarise commented that they had arrived and were impressed by the grandeur of the gathering. The receptionist, Alma, greeted them and asked why they had come to Esteem Guild today. Gilnarise responded that they wanted to request a status assessment. Alma took notes, and Karma explained that this meant assessing the value of their magical device. Alma took notes, and Karma suggested they proceed together. Tim sensed Alma was a new employee. She checked the papers and said they had the latest form, which could assess basic stats, adventure skills, and life skills. Gilnarise was curious about life skills. Alma explained that these are often referred to as auxiliary skills. Karma added that while life skills might seem unimportant, they're actually crucial for the ability to marry and deal with high-level yokai, which shocked Gilnarise. She decided to focus on the basics right now. She didn't want to disappoint Tim because she was still in training. However, Tim encouraged her, telling her to be more confident. He joked that the fried eggs were delicious because he had tried them before. Alma and Karma both smiled, complimenting them on being a wonderful couple. Tim then gave them 2 tickets. Alma asked what they were. Karma replied that the tickets were free, telling them they just needed to quickly lead the way. After reviewing the papers, Alma said they would need to go into separate rooms, so they should go into each room to assess the situation. Karma hugged Gilnarise, reassuring her that she would take care of her. Alma then helped Tim, and they both bowed to each other as a sign of respect. Tim introduced himself. He thought this was the first time he had participated in a performance review. Karma led Gilnarise into a room and an introduction to the equipment. Gilnarise worried about Tim, wondering if he had been attacked by someone outside. Karma sat down with the device, assuring her there was no need to worry, explaining that Alma was harmless and quite frail. She added that if Gilnarise was worried about anything, it would probably be whether she could use the magical device correctly. Karma instructed Gilnarise to stand in the center of the circle, a beam of light surrounded her, and the assessment concluded. The results showed that Gilnarise only received a G rating, the lowest. Karma then pointed out that her hand-to-hand combat rating was E, meaning Gilnarise could potentially be a warrior, and her magic rating is C, which is quite impressive. With these stats, she could easily become a silver-ranked hunter. Gilnarise thanked Karma, but said that her rating wasn't a C. Then she pointed out a sign to Karma in the C. Karma was surprised to realize that Gilnarise had bypassed the loop, a miraculous feat. She had only heard rumors about such abilities. Gilnarise explained that she had reached rank S when she started the second loop. Karma was completely astonished by this revelation. Meanwhile, Gilnarise wondered what Tim was up to and hoped he wasn't being tricked into undressing for some kind of test. In addition, Alma asked him to take off his shirt. Tim was surprised and reluctantly agreed. Alma quickly apologized, saying that it seemed unnecessary for him to undress. "But if you want to, that's fine too." Tim asked why. Alma apologized again, explaining that it was her first time doing this job and she wasn't used to it. Tim reassured Alma, saying it was okay and that she could treat him as a test subject, so she didn't need to worry. Tim stands in the circle, and Alma completed his test. He was pleased with the result. But when looking at the results, they were all marked G, the lowest rating. He thought to himself that even though it was the lowest rating, but his only redeeming quality was perhaps his secondary skills, with the highest rating being only D, feeling disappointed. He told himself that he was useless. Alma comforted him, saying that wasn't true at all, and that he was much better than her. Tim then asked about the symbol next to the ratings. but Alma knew nothing about it and suggested it might be a bug. Tim decided to ignore it and walked outside. "I'm sorry, Gilnerise, for keeping you waiting." Outside, he saw a pretty girl chatting with Gilnerise. When Gilnerise saw Tim, she quickly approached him and, noticing that Gilnerise had a companion, smiled. Tim asked about the girl, and Gilnerise replied that she didn't know her because she had just been called in. The girl introduced herself as Lyra and suggested that they should learn swordsmanship from her. Realizing they were both novice hunters, she offered to teach them for free. Tim wondered why the lesson was free. Lyra explained that she only taught for free if Gilnerise also participated. And with her cute and pretty appearance, students would flock to her classes. Tim asked her if she was implying that she would use Gilnerise to attract more students. Gilnerise replied that she had no problem with it, especially since they didn't have money. Tim realized that was true. They needed to become stronger. Feeling embarrassed by Lyra's comment, he took a sip of something to hide his embarrassment. Tim sensed something different about Lyra, so he offered to treat her to a meal, since she was teaching them for free. Lyra pointed out that they had just said they had no money. Gilnerise responded that food was the only thing they had in excess. Tim then gave her a meal. She thanked him, saying she would take some home to save for later. Tim suggested she eat it now. Because they had enough food and didn't need to save any, he even offered her more food, and Lyra was surprised to see how much they had. Kneeling before them, she asked if they could let her sister have enough to eat. Lyra explained that she would take both of them home, because her older sister Chloe was frail and needed extra nutrition. Tim asked why Lyra didn't take the assignment if she was so skilled at swordsmanship. Lyra replied that it was obvious they were new to the country. She then explained that everyone in the slum was a bubetsu. Because Tim and Gilnerise didn't understand the term, Lyra pointed to the lizard-shaped mark on the back of her neck. She explained that 2 years ago, everyone in the capital was summoned to the castle for a health check, and those marked with a magical seal were called bubetsu, a term used to describe people who were discriminated against in society, had lost their homes and jobs. After that, they were no longer allowed to live in the city center and could only take on menial tasks or low-paying jobs if they were lucky enough to find work. Right now, they're just trying to get by. Gilnerise pointed out that this is a form of discrimination, and cutting off the lizard's tail might be an overreaction. There are many possible explanations for this, such as diverting the frustration of ordinary citizens, but it is still too cruel. Then she asked him the easiest way to strengthen the bond between teammates. Tim asked if she meant helping each other. Gilnerise replied that there was a simpler method, that is, to create outcasts. It's similar to what Tim experienced at the guild. Tim thought that guild had always been a close-knit group, but Lyra said that being ostracized made things difficult. Even the act of secretly approaching others. Tim clenched his fist and said that if that were true, he would help, just like Gilnerise had done for him. Lyra apologized to them for bringing them to such a place. Tim looked over at Chloe, who was lying on the bed, and Lyra informed her that she had returned. Lyra advised Chloe not to push herself too hard, but Chloe replied that she didn't know how many more times she would have to say it. Tim and Gilnerise exchanged glances. Gilnerise then asked Lyra to let Tim handle the situation. Tim approached Chloe, who gently told him not to come closer, as he might catch a cold. She also mentioned that she was very dirty. Tim reassured her, saying everything was fine and she shouldn't worry. He believed that by healing her, he can wash away everything that's bothering her. After that, her cough began to subside, and she told Lyra that she felt much better. Lyra was delighted to hear that. Gilnerise then asked Tim about the stain on Chloe's clothes. Tim agreed and asked Chloe if she could show him her magic seal. Chloe nodded and showed it to him. Tim remarked that it was a stubborn stain, but he believed he could handle it. With his skills, he quickly cleaned the stain. This surprised Lyra because the contemptuous look had disappeared. Gilnerise mentioned that even though the illness had been cured, they should now focus on improving Chloe's nutrition. Tim suggested preparing some food and asked Chloe if she could eat porridge. Chloe agreed, and immediately Tim made porridge for her. Lyra and Chloe were both surprised when they saw Tim do that. When Tim fed Chloe porridge, Gilnarize felt a little jealous. And I wish I could feed her too. After feeding Chloe, Tim asks Lyra to gather those who have been marked by the seal of contempt, because he intends to clean for all of them. After a while, Lyra had gathered about 800 people, and wondered if Tim could handle it. Gilnarize helped direct everyone to line up in a single file, reminding them not to push or shove. Tim slowly approached each person and removed the mark of contempt from them. Their joy increased even more when the sign disappeared, and they realized that they would no longer be discriminated against, that they would be considered human beings once again. Everyone thanked Tim for his help. One man even said that with the mark gone, he could take care of his family. Tim replied that he was happy to have been able to help everyone. At that moment, a girl arrived, supporting her father, and asked Tim for help. Tim quickly assessed the situation and realized it was a case of severe malnutrition. He asked them how long they had been like that. Thinking about energy drinks, Tim realized they would need preserved food to meet their daily nutritional needs. With a gesture of his hand, Tim summoned a large quantity of food and explained that it would all become edible with the addition of hot water. He started distributing food, and when one woman tasted it, she exclaimed that it had been a long time since she'd had such a warm meal, and it was truly delicious. A man added that Tim not only removed the markings but also fed them, and they were extremely grateful to him. Then Tim offered to make new clothes for all of them. Everyone was surprised, but not long after, Tim provided them with new clothes. They were touched by their happiness and the success that came from Tim's simple efforts. Seeing Tim's touched reaction, Gilnarize said, "Let's eat too." Tim nodded and asked if she wanted some porridge. She asked, surprised, how he knew. As she stared at the bowl of hot porridge, she admitted that she was very sensitive to hot food and wanted him to blow on it to cool it down. Tim reassured her, saying that with his skills, he could adjust the temperature to her liking. Gilnarize seemed disappointed to hear this. Tim then said that he believed everyone had finished eating and had received their new clothes. Gilnarize stepped onto a box so he could see everyone and speak. She told the crowd that those who had suffered abuse were no longer labeled as despised. However, they still had to fear being discovered, as there was still a possibility of being caught and marked with the magic seal again. She suggested that everyone should keep their identities secret and start working slowly, aiming to leave the country, save money, and go to a place where there is no discrimination. Until then, she encourages them to work hard. She warned them not to let their guard down and to unite in order to win their happiness. Tim then said that a businessman named Rock, who wore a brown hat, might be able to help them. Everyone thanked Tim for the advice, and Lyra, with a trembling voice, thanked them both as well. Tim replied that if she wasn't comfortable speaking formally, there was no need to force her. Lyra responded that she didn't know how to repay such kindness. Then she asked if there was anything they could do for them. Tim and Gilnarize both replied that they had promised to teach her swordsmanship. All three of them went to an ideal location to practice swordsmanship. Lyra then asked if they had brought swords from the warehouse. Tim drew out 2 swords and gave one to Gilnarize. Lyra asked how they had obtained them. Tim asked her where she had learned swordsmanship. Lyra replied that she had met someone who taught her this art form, although she was initially skeptical, but in the end, that person also gave her a sword. When Gilnarize saw the sword, she asked if it was the holy sword Flambel. Tim asked if she knew anything about it. Gilnarize then asked Lyra to tell him more about that person. Lyra agreed and began to explain that before she became Bubetsu, she encountered someone who had collapsed on the street. That person asked for money to buy a glass of water, and just as Tim was beginning to suspect who it was, Gilnarize told him to stop and not jump to conclusions. Lyra went on to say that the man vomited on her, which frightened her and made her jump onto the roof. The man said she was talented and asked if she wanted to learn from the best, then offered to pay 1,000 sol as tuition. Gilnarize became angry when he heard that the man was asking for money. Tim asked what to do next, as they couldn't be sure it was ganache. Lyra went on to say that the man gave her the sword, hoping she would never have to use what he had taught her. Afterward, the man staggered out of town and she never saw him again. Both Tim and Gilnarize agreed that it was definitely Ganache. Gilnarize became even more angry because she hadn't spoken to Ganache in a long time. Tim suggested that she focus on Lyra's swordsmanship lessons instead of getting angry about it. Gilnarize then drew his sword and perfected it as an extension of his body. She had mastered the concept of breath without interrupting her sword form, which relieved Lyra and made her realize that her teaching method had been effective. When Lyra realized Tim was struggling, she apologized, feeling that it might be because she didn't teach well enough. Tim reassured her that it wasn't her fault, but rather his own incompetence at everything. Lyra tried to comfort Tim, pointing out his good qualities. His kind heart, extraordinary diligence, and the way he saved Chloe and helped so many others. To her, Tim was like a living story. Tim thanked her for the encouragement, but Lyra approached him, saying she wanted to be of more help to him and that he could tell her anything. Tim then asked her. He went to a room he would book at the end of the day, along with a request for Lyra and Chloe to come there as well. Lyra wondered why when Tim replied that he wanted their relationship to become closer. Lyra felt uneasy, her voice lowered. She said she would be happy if it happened, even though she thought Tim didn't care about them. This was the first time she had felt this way. Tim replied, telling her not to worry, because he would teach her, and Gilnarize would be there too. Lyra was shocked by what he said, and asked if they were all together, and if he was sure about it. Tim agreed, adding that they could talk all night. And hopefully Lyra will become close friends with Gilnarize. He thought of Gilnarize's sad eyes and realized that he didn't want her to feel lonely anymore. Tim then mentioned that this would be Lyra's first time at the inn, so he offered to take her there. Lyra felt embarrassed, and she rolled on the ground to cover her face, surprising Tim, who didn't understand what was happening. She begged him not to touch someone like her, fearing she would defile him. Lyra then said he should kill her right in front of Gilnarize because she considered herself the worst kind of woman. Just then, Gilnarize arrived and asked what was going on. Lyra continued to grumble, saying she was worthless. Chloe comforted her, telling her not to think that way, and asserting that Tim didn't understand her feelings. Tim, completely bewildered, admitted he didn't know what to say. Tim then suggested that the four of them should throw a party. He asked Gilnarize to help spread the blanket, but she replied that the animal should lie on it. When Gilnarize spread out the cloth, she placed a giant monster on it. Tim remarked that it was a huge catch and should be cut up for preservation. Lyra stood up and began to chop the beast with her sword, realizing that it would take quite a long time given its size. Tim reassured her not to worry, that he would handle it. Using his skills, Tim quickly cut the monster into many small pieces. Lyra was astonished. Seeing how fast Tim was, she couldn't see the blade. Tim explained that his utility skills were quite good. Lyra then remarked that he wasn't really good at swordsmanship, which Tim guessed wasn't his forte either. Tim took the meat, and since it was still fresh, he decided to make steak. His plan was to slice the monster's flesh thinly, arrange the slices on a plate, and grill them until medium rare to medium rare. He also prepared a stew with carrots shaped like rabbits and cats, along with 8 different sauces, ranging from sweet to spicy. To complete the meal, Tim sprinkles some cilantro on the potatoes. When everything is ready, Lyra praised it as a wonderful work of art. Both she and Chloe were thrilled to see the cat-shaped carrots. Chloe exclaimed that it felt like a dream. Tim then asked Chloe if she was okay eating meat, and she agreed, saying that it was thanks to him that she felt better. Lyra asked if it was all right since she couldn't teach him swordsmanship, and it seemed he would surpass her in no time. Gilnarize called out to Lyra, saying that food tastes better when you have friends with you, and that's the best way to show gratitude. It's truly a great reward to see others enjoy the food she prepared. They all enjoyed the meal together. When they arrived at the inn, the man informed them that there were no rooms for 4 people. A girl apologized and explained that the place was a bit run down, but they could still stay anytime. Tim then told Lyra that the bathroom would open at 8 o'clock and asked her what kind of pajamas she preferred since it was her first time staying there. He reassured her that she could ask him for anything. Lyra thanked him, and Chloe said she didn't need to worry. Lyra, Chloe, and Gilnerize all wanted to wear pajamas. Tim thought it was a difficult choice, but he had prepared pajamas for all of them. They finished showering, and when Tim gave them the pajamas, he noticed they were very comfortable. Chloe, wearing a hooded pajama top with cat ears, Gilnerize was very happy. Tim was delighted to see her enjoying it. Once they were all inside the room, Lyra asked why Tim and Gilnerize had come to this country. Gilnerize replied that it all started when Tim forcefully pulled her away from the group. Tim guessed it all started when she kicked him out of the club. Chloe, who was sitting next to Gilnerize, asked why she did that. Gilnerize replied that there was more to the story yet to be told. Lyra was still a little confused, saying that it all seemed a bit strange to her. Gilnerize asked Tim to choose his words more carefully. Tim apologized for it, and they continued chatting for a while. Chloe, feeling sleepy, said that Tim had been through a lot of hardship. She felt grateful that they had been able to escape that country. Lyra agreed with her. Tim thought to himself that they must have both suffered much more than that. Lyra then asked Tim why he wanted to become an adventurer. Gilnerize pointed out that she hadn't even asked Tim the question. Tim apologized, saying he hesitated to share. Lyra told him not to force himself to talk, but he replied that it was okay. He was ready to tell about his past. She asked if he would share, even if it might disappoint them. Tim assured them that nothing would disappoint them. Chloe encouraged him to speak up. Tim took a deep breath and said that in the past, he'd become complacent with his own talent and was a bad person. The scene cuts to Tim being 10 years old, his hair no longer black. While eating in the dining room, he asks, "What is this?" and demands that whoever made it be brought to him. His sister, Ari, scolded him, saying he shouldn't call anyone trash. Tim pointed at the bell peppers and said, "Look at these, aren't they all from my sworn enemy?" A man, noticing Tim's frustration, remarked that Tim's recent diet was unbalanced, which was why he was now eating vegetables. Tim angrily yelled at the man to shut up, calling it harassment. He refused to eat even a single bite and asked the man what his father would do to Tim if he died of starvation. The man simply asked him to eat something. However, Tim had become lost in his own thoughts. He believed that royal blood, often referred to as the royal lineage, must possess abilities far superior to those of commoners. Tim was arrogant, believing that he, like arrogant, was a rare genius among those of royal descent. But one day, Ari fell seriously ill, and Tim asked if she was okay. She apologized to him, but her condition was getting worse. When Tim spoke with the doctors, they informed him that Ari had contracted Fitotsuki, a rare and dangerous disease, and that she only had 2 months to live. Tim angrily vowed to save her at all costs. During those 2 months, Tim believed he was a genius, confident that if no one else could find a cure, he certainly would. He recalled a forbidden book, a book containing magic that violated the laws of nature, known as forbidden magic. As he attempts to approach the door to the forbidden area, Tim encounters guards who warn him that using forbidden magic is strictly prohibited. However, determined to save Ari, Tim knows he will have to find a way to sneak the book out undetected. At that moment, a guard came to report that a man was causing a disturbance at the castle gate and that the other guards needed assistance. As everyone rushed to the gate, Tim saw his chance. He didn't know who the man was, but hoped the trouble would drag on a little longer, so that he would have enough time to save Ari. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Tim approached and retrieved the forbidden book. He thought that with the help of this book, he could cure any disease. Upon examining the book, he discovered that it had been created by the sorceress Gilnerisa Rena Blair when she was only 10 years old. Tim thought to himself that if both of them could be geniuses at that age, then surely he could be too. He took the book and began studying it, determined to master its contents within the remaining 2 months. When a man told him to take a break, Tim coldly replied, "Don't get in my way." He knew that by pretending to be sane and trying to please everyone, he would be able to climb to the position of heir to the throne. But he had no time to sleep or rest. Ari's life depended on him. A month later, Tim was carrying Ari down the stairs and reassured her that he would definitely save her. In the middle of the room was a strange magic circle. Tim placed Ari in the middle and wondered if using forbidden magic would mean sacrificing his martial arts skills, magical abilities, and even his education. But he decided that it was a small price to pay, a price he would gladly pay, even if it meant giving up his limbs. If that could save Ari. After the ceremony, Ari suddenly woke up, showing no signs of illness. She looked around in confusion, only to see Tim lying unconscious beside her. Panicked, she rushed to his side. Tim thought that although the magic had worked and Ari had been saved, the price paid was too high. His hair had turned black as a side effect. His father then announced that Tim would be treated as a slave, forced to serve the other princes and perform menial tasks. Tim reflected that he had no regrets about losing his talent and being relegated to a commoner, especially since it meant saving Ari. Despite being stripped of his royal prestige, he felt at peace with his decision. Upon reaching the servants' quarters, Tim met the other servants, and he realized that the prince who was once hated had become just like them. Nothing but trash. He told them they could beat him up however they liked. How cruel, I thought to myself. His hand trembled as a man approached and took it. The man reprimanded him, saying that he was still just a 10-year-old child, too preoccupied with desires, acting selfishly, stubbornly, and indulging himself. That's how he lives, the man said. Now Tim has a lot to learn, especially regarding the noble character of his younger sister. The man then advised him to take a shower, eat properly, and avoid staying up late. Tim felt emotional because the man's words reminded him of his past mistakes. In the following days, Tim learned household chores from the servants and realized that he had escaped the consequences he would have faced. While doing laundry, he realized that housework has more meaning than what it might seem on the outside. If he had paid more attention to the hardships of others, perhaps he wouldn't have looked down on them so much. One day, Tim was summoned to the arena to witness Aaron's match. However, something unexpected happened. Greta was stabbed in the stomach by Aaron, and Tim rushed to ask if he was all right. However, Tim, full of rudeness, wondered how Aaron could dare to do such a thing. Aaron angrily retorted that a mere servant like Tim had no right to criticize the prince. Greta told Tim to stop. A young boy witnessing the scene wonders, what is happening to this country? A servant who offered a few words of comfort was wounded, while the prince lost the battle. The boy couldn't imagine living in a country where a prince like that would become king. It felt terrifying. Tim started crying for Greta, encouraging him to try and endure it, looking at Greta's wounds. Tim realized he was neither able nor powerful enough to help. This helplessness frustrated him greatly and felt tormented by their own weakness. Tim believed they needed to treat Greta's wounds immediately. The boy told Aaron that since he had won the battle, Aaron had to keep his promise and grant Tim a wish. Tim then asked Aaron to use his healing magic to save Greta. Aaron agreed, and after finishing, asked if that was enough. Tim was overjoyed to see that Greta had been healed. As Aaron prepared to leave, he said the situation was embarrassing and told them to leave when they were finished. The boy standing beside him wondered what was happening to this country. Tim approached the boy, thanked him, and asked who he was. The boy replied that he was an adventurous traveler. He explained that when an arrogant fellow was walking around town, he punched him, and that's how the fight started. Tim was surprised to learn that the boy had punched a prince. The boy admitted that the action was immature, but justified it by saying that the prince, being of royal blood, was a deceiver. He called Tim the servant. It was said that Tim tried to hit Aaron but wasn't strong enough. He told Tim that the country couldn't be changed that way. Instead, he advised him to become an adventurer, gain experience, and play the game intelligently. With time, Tim might become strong enough to punch a prince just like the boy did. These pieces of advice made Tim feel encouraged. Tim decided to pursue a risky path. Determined, he left the castle to begin a new journey. At a fruit stall in the market, a girl picked up a few apples. Noticing her keen eyesight, the salesperson said he would give me an extra apple as a gift. Tim, sitting on a nearby barrel, felt disappointed. He had failed the exam 20 times, and his money was almost gone. Tim wondered what he should do next. The girl approached him, gave him the apple, and said that she heard his stomach rumbling with hunger. She introduced herself as Fiona and asked if he was having any difficulties, offering to chat if he wanted. Tim said he wanted to become an adventurer. Fiona shared that she had similar plans and showed him where she would be taking the entrance exam. She invited him to join her. When Tim heard the name Gilnerise, he remembered it was the name of the founder of a society. She had saved his life. She was more precious to him than his own life. Tim hesitated, saying that someone like him couldn't possibly join such a large organization. Fiona replied that she also lacked confidence when she first started. But if they give up without trying, they will never be able to help those who need them. Tim thought about what she had said. How could he give up when he longed so much to become an adventurer? He decided to take the exam. Then Tim stopped talking about his past with Gilnerise, Chloe, and Lyra, and expressed deep gratitude to Gilnerise. Tim noticed that they all seemed disappointed. Chloe was particularly surprised to hear that Tim was a prince, while Gilnerise was thinking about the red-haired adventurer who had beaten the prince. Tim thanked them for listening. Lyra replied, assuring him not to worry, that she was still on his side, and Chloe felt the same way. Tim was moved and expressed his gratitude. Gilnerise pointed at him and said she had many questions to ask. Then she asked what had happened between him and Fiona after the incident. Lyra curiously asked if Fiona was lovely and eagerly asked Tim to tell her more about Eri. Tim, slightly annoyed, asked if that was really what they were interested in. Chloe remarked that it looked like they wouldn't be getting much sleep tonight. Therefore, the whole group chatted and laughed all night. The next morning, Gilnerise turned to Tim, and knowing that they had all heard about his dream, asked what they should do now. Tim replied that he wanted to visit the public union. He explained that it was a place where even ordinary people could get assignments, usually simple ones. He suggested that Chloe and Lyra should rest there because Lyra had a nosebleed this morning. Tim promised to pay for their room tonight. Gilnerise stopped him and said she had an idea. Tim asked what the plan was. A short while later, the hotel manager was brought in to show them the room, and Tim was surprised to see it. He wondered if it was a royal suite. Gilnerise told Tim to restrain himself. And after a while, using his power, the hotel owner's daughter arrived to explain that their humble room had unexpectedly been transformed into a luxurious space fit for royalty. The manager noticed that the room was surprisingly clean. Gilnerise suggested that they should make the other rooms as royal as possible, but in return, they would be allowed to stay for free. Tim hesitated, saying that might be too much, but the innkeeper assured him that he could charge much more for such rooms from other customers. Then he suggested they stay as long as they wanted, even for a month. He shook Tim's hand, affirming that he was a man of his word. Tim asked if he was sure of that. Gilnerise replied, telling them to stay in their room while they went to receive their assignment. The innkeeper wished them good luck and cautioned them to be careful. When Tim and Gilnerise left, the innkeeper turned to his daughter Emma and asked her if she would like to marry Tim. Emma, surprised, asked him what he was talking about. Unexpectedly, as Tim and Gilnerise continued towards the guild, they heard a man shouting, "Make way for Prince Assad of the Kingdom of Linhart." The man ordered the commoners to move aside. Everyone bowed. Gilnerise suggested to Tim, "We should bow too." Tim agreed, and as the prince passed by, Tim noticed a mark resembling a lizard on the prince's neck. Gilnerise also noticed and commented, "That mark certainly wasn't accidental. There must be a reason behind it." Tim agreed, pondering Gilnerise's words. A man asked, "Doesn't everyone know?" He then explained that Prince Assad wanted to end discrimination and inherit the throne. Tim understood that the marks on the prince's neck were intentional. The man continued, saying that with the presence of Crown Prince Belial, things would not be easy for Assad. Tim pondered to himself, wondering how many people Prince Assad could ultimately save. When they arrived at the guild, a young boy gave them a task, explaining that they could take on various jobs, including monster-slaying missions. Tim was very excited to see the monster-slaying missions available. Gilnerise called him, asking if he remembered their promise, Tim realized it was time to fulfill that promise. This would be his first mission. He then told the boy which task he would be assigned. The boy nodded, agreeing to assign them the tasks. Tim thought to himself, "It's been a long time, but finally the time has come to fulfill that promise." Their mission was to gather herbs, so they headed towards the forest. While they were gathering herbs, Tim remarked that they were quite scarce, perhaps because the area had recently been completely depleted of produce. Gilnerise suggested that they might have to venture a little further from the kingdom. As they continued, she suddenly placed a wreath on Tim's head. It surprised him. She smiled and said he was very cute, and as a prince, he needed a crown. But she didn't think the wreath suited him. Tim thanked her and added that he was sure this wreath would suit Chloe better. Tim thought to himself that this wreath didn't suit his full masculine image, and he wanted Gilnerise to see him that way. Gilnerise then decided to make a wreath for Chloe, and she said that even though they didn't find many herbs, it was still a lot of fun being with Tim. Tim smiled and said that he felt the same way. At that moment, Gilnerise looked up at the sky and called out Tim's name. When Tim turned to look at her, he was shocked to see a monstrous bird attacking her. The creature attacked and Gilnerise fell to the ground. Blood was gushing from the wound. Tim stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding, unable to believe what had just happened. Tim was shocked and rushed to her side. A man appeared, wielding a sword to treat wounds, and quickly kill the bird. Tim looked at Gilnerise. He thought that if he had just had 30 more minutes to complete his travel gear, everything could have been fine. He felt responsible for her pain. He believed he was responsible for her injury while trying to protect someone who looked like him. A boy approached and explained that they were the ones who had stopped the guardian bird. Tim asked the boy for help. The boy examined Gilnerise's wound and noticed that the bird had hit her. The boy used his medical skills to assess the injuries and gave her a bottle of medicine to drink. He reassured Tim that there was no need to worry. Her life was not in danger. Her armor was of the highest quality, and although she would be unconscious for a while, her wounds had healed thanks to both magic and medicine. The boy then asked Tim's name. Tim introduced himself and Gilnerise. The boy introduced himself as Prince Assad, second in line to the throne, and took responsibility for the guardian bird's escape during the hunt. He promised to compensate for the damaged equipment and invite them to the castle when Gilnerise wakes up. Prince Assad gave Tim a pass and advised him to give it to the gatekeeper. "Excuse me for being hasty." Prince Assad quickly departed with the bird. Tim bowed his head in apology and lifted Gilnerise up. While wondering what would have happened without Assad, or if he hadn't helped, what will happen next? Tim's skills and stats were at their lowest point, and he knew he couldn't carry her any further alone. He felt as though he couldn't live up to Gilnerise's expectations. All he could think about was that she would wake up, and he vowed to do everything in his power to bring her happiness. He dedicated his entire life to her well-being. When Gilnerise woke up at the inn, she immediately apologized to Lyra, Chloe, and Tim for worrying them. Lyra asked if she was in pain or if she was okay. Chloe, relieved, was happy to see Gilnerise awake. Tim felt a wave of relief, too. Gilnerise mentioned that she couldn't remember anything after being attacked by the monster, then asked him what happened afterward. Tim recounted everything to them. Gilnerise expressed that Tim must have been through a lot and advised him to rest. Point out the dark circles under his eyes, caused by staying up all night watching over Gilnerise. Lyra said they had advised him to sleep, but he still refused. Chloe then commented to Lyra that she also had dark circles under her eyes. Tim thought to himself that if they had never joined this adventure, if he hadn't dragged them into his dream, he might have been able to protect Gilnerise's happiness. However, he couldn't bring himself to say that he would give up his adventurous life. Time passed, and he continued the charade. Gilnerise suggested they complete the task of gathering herbs, as a month had already passed. Tim replied that they should focus on making money first, because they had a lot of odd jobs to do during the day. The job of gathering herbs didn't pay well, and they needed a lot of money to buy a nice house. When they got a house, they would throw a party for everyone. Gilnerise agreed to focus on making money. Tim reassured her that he would take care of everything. adding that Chloe had learned to read, write, and speak several languages during her studies. He suggested sending her to school because she was very intelligent and could one day become a scholar at court. As they were leaving the inn, Tim told the three others to stay and enjoy their time. Go outside. Tim thought to himself that there was no need to willingly seek out danger. After 28 days, when I returned to my rented room, he found a letter from Gilnarize. She had left. Tim opened the letter and read her apology for her sudden departure. She explained that, being with him, he wouldn't be able to move forward with his dreams, and she didn't want him to give up because of her. She left the ring behind, a reminder for him to keep the promise they had made together. She thanked him for everything he had done for her. Tim told himself she was right. He would put the ring back on her finger. Becoming an adventurer wasn't just his dream. It was Gilnarize's dream too. Determined, he rushed outside to find her. Gilnarize called him back. And when he turned around, she hugged him tightly. She said she couldn't help the heroes, and she jumped out to stop him from worrying. Seeing her back, Tim was deeply moved and admitted he was wrong. She said that love is difficult, then apologized for scaring him. Tim then took Gilnarize's hand and asked them to repeat their oath. He put the ring on her finger. They were determined never to turn their backs on their dreams again. No matter how many challenges lay ahead, together, they would become the greatest adventurers. One morning, Tim, full of enthusiasm, announced that he would be taking on a mission that very day. Lyra remarked that he seemed more energetic than usual today. Chloe hugged him, overjoyed to see him back in his normal self. She said it was wonderful to see him like this. Tim asked if he had really been that bad before. Chloe nodded and said that even though he always smiled, he seemed to be suffering inside. To cheer him up, Chloe and Lyra decided to visit the library. Lyra turned to Chloe and told her not to say things like that anymore. Tim thanked and apologized to everyone for making them worry. Then he suggested the whole group have breakfast together. When Chloe hugged him from behind, she felt something hard in his pocket. Curious, she took it out and discovered it was a permit to enter the castle. Tim suddenly remembered that this was something Prince Asad had given him when he helped him and Gilnarize. He realized that they had been asked to meet Asad at the castle, but having forgotten about these trousers, he hadn't worn them for a long time. Gilnarize then asked if they should go to the royal castle before undertaking their mission. Lyra mentioned that she and Chloe had some research to do at the library and would wait for them near the castle. Tim agreed to the plan. Then Tim and Gilnarize proceeded towards the castle and met Shal, Asad's servant. Shal smiled, saying that she had been looking forward to their arrival. Tim thought to himself that Shal seemed very serious. Shal informed them that the prince wanted to meet them in person and would lead them there. On the way, Shal suddenly mentioned that Asad had actually been unwell for the past month and had been sighing frequently throughout the day. Tim anxiously asked if it was all right to meet the prince in that state. Shal reassured him that it was fine, even joking that they could wake him up if necessary. Shal led them into Asad's room and announced that the prince had guests. Initially, Asad didn't look up and tried to refuse the meeting. But when he saw Gilnarize, his expression immediately changed. He quickly knelt down, holding a rose, and said, "Since meeting you a month ago, I can't stop thinking about you. Would you consider dating me with the intention of marriage?" Tim was completely stunned by the scene. Tim wondered if this was the feeling of unrequited love that people often talk about. Gilnarize gently reminded Tim that building a relationship with Prince Asad could be a great benefit to him. But before she could finish her sentence, Tim quickly asserted that she wouldn't be dating Asad. He stepped forward and stood between them. Although deep down, I also thought that an upright person like Asad was probably a worthy match for Gilnarize. But he couldn't bear the thought of it. Asad, looking confused, asked Gilnarize what she meant by saying she would agree if Tim agreed. He suspected that Tim's treatment of her was turning her into a slave, making her do whatever he wanted. Turning to Tim, Asad sternly asked if Tim was forcing Gilnarize into submission through violence or abuse, then loudly demanded that Tim release her immediately. Tim immediately denied it, explaining that it was all a misunderstanding. Gilnarize, looking relieved, thanked Tim for stopping her before she said something inappropriate. Then she turned to Asad and explained that it didn't matter if Tim teased her sometimes. She smiled at Tim, but Tim replied, "Don't say things like that." Asad, growing increasingly angry, I challenged Tim to a duel. Tim was shocked by the challenge. Gilnarize immediately spoke up, telling Asad not to be childish and reminding him that Tim was just a novice explorer. However, Asad remained resolute, saying they would set the rules to give Tim a chance to win. The first rule: they are only allowed to use wooden swords. The second rule: the first person to hit their opponent in the head wins. The third rule: no magic is allowed. Gilnarize shook her head, calling it absurd and declaring that she and Tim would leave. But Asad added that if Tim won, he would grant one of Tim's wishes, provided it was within his capabilities. However, if Tim loses, Asad just wants to talk to Gilnarize a little. He claims he will help her open her eyes and free herself from Tim's influence. Gilnarize replied that even if Tim lost, she only needed to talk to Asad for a while, so she suggested another condition. They would fight in a way Tim chose, at a location Tim decided. Asad confidently replied that he would win without even hitting her in the head. She stopped just before reaching him. Gilnarize agreed, saying that if it meant Tim wouldn't get hurt, then it was a fair deal. She turned to Tim and asked if he had prepared any equipment for her. Tim thought she was referring to equipment to enhance her fighting abilities. However, when Asad overheard, he was surprised to learn that Tim was also worried about her clothes. Tim realized the situation had been seriously misunderstood and hastily explained that Gilnarize didn't need to participate in the match. He said he would accept the challenge himself. Gilnarize refused, insisting that being hit on the head with a wooden sword would still hurt. Tim reassured her, saying he wasn't afraid of getting hurt. But avoiding challenges will be even more difficult. Tim is determined to defeat Asad using his own strength. Consider this the first step on the path to becoming a true explorer. They proceeded to the arena, where Tim chose a wooden sword for himself. He reiterated the rules. The first person to land a blow to the opponent's head wins. Shal, the referee, asked if both were ready and signaled for the match to begin. Tim focused, thinking to himself that he had to be the one to attack first. Unexpectedly, he summoned a basin and hit Asad on the head with it. This confused the prince. Shal acknowledged that the attack had hit Asad in the head and confirmed that there were no signs of magic. Gilnarize exclaimed with joy, praising it as a perfect victory. Tim gently asked if it was all right. They also commented that using laundry skills in this way is actually very difficult. Asad, astonished, admitted he had never considered such a method. He called it a mediocre skill, but acknowledged that only those with unwavering devotion to serving others could attain such a high level of magic. Asad accepted his defeat. When Shal approached to wipe Asad's face, the prince refused, saying that he wasn't sweating and therefore didn't need wiping. Then, Asad approached Tim, apologized for his rudeness, and admitted that he had spoken too much based on his personal opinion. Tim responded that they first needed to clarify a misunderstanding regarding the payment. Asad replied that he understood everything simply by observing Tim's skills. The extraordinary skills he possessed, skills that had served others, all spoke volumes. Tim thanked him for that. Asad then asked him if he had any requests. Tim asked for some of the recovery medicine he had used before. Asad explained that those medicines were homemade by combining ingredients and that he intended to give Tim some. He asked if there was anything else. Tim replied that he wanted to try all the medicines Asad had created. Asad asked if Tim really wanted to taste them. Tim replied that just a small amount would suffice. He thought that recovery potions were no different from the drinks he usually consumed, all based on ingredients, effectiveness, materials, and processing methods, all analyzed and memorized through tasting. Asad warned that some medications have strong side effects. Tim responded that it was all right, as his cleansing skills could remove the drugs from his body. After a moment of thought, Asad agreed to let him taste the medicines, assuring him that there would be no danger. Tim thanked him for his kindness. As they passed through an underground corridor, Tim remarked that they had been gone quite a while. Asad replied that the medicines were not stored properly and only the royal family had the right to open this area. Gilnarize pointed out that there will certainly be people who try to take advantage of things like that. Asad then showed them the room where he used to store the medicines he had created. Then he led them inside. He explained that some of the medicines had such complex manufacturing processes that it took several days to complete. Shal, curious, asked how he made them. Tim replied that he could understand everything just by experimenting with the substances. So there was no need to worry. Asad wondered just how accurate Tim's tasting skills were. Tim began tasting different medications, and Gilnariz asked Asad where the aphrodisiac was. She joked that a love potion would be perfect for her. Shal remarked that Tim was a real nuisance. Asad wondered if Tim was a victim in all of this. Tim then called Gilnariz, apologizing for making her wait. He overheard Gilnariz saying that she wanted a drug that would turn her into a person with cat ears and a tail, and perhaps some kind of drug that will turn her into a child for a while longer. Asad replied that he had already told her there would be no such strange medicine, and he couldn't believe she had become such a person. Tim wondered to himself when they had become so close. Asad called Tim closer and told him to keep the travel pass. He added that if anyone caused trouble, Tim could just run straight back to the castle for safety. Afterward, they left the castle and met Lyra and Chloe. Lyra said she found some great information in the library. Chloe wants to read it, but her words only confused Tim further. Tim took the papers, and Chloe explained that Lyra had to beg the librarian and pay a large daily fee to access them. Lyra quickly stopped Chloe, telling her she didn't need to say such things. Tim thought to himself that even though he had given up on his dream, Lyra was busy pursuing it. He then thanked both of them. Lyra replied, telling him not to cry because it was too early to celebrate. She then asked him to read the Chronicles of Heroes, a rare book. Chloe added that the original was written in an Elven language, and the translation Tim had was hers. Tim felt amazed to see that Chloe was even proficient in an Elven language. He read about Teresa Freud, who, despite being of fairy descent, a race considered the weakest, was a mutant, and her name was included in the list of the world's greatest heroes. The reason she possesses such superior strength, even stronger than the most powerful warriors, is due to her extraordinary embroidery skills. Tim wondered to himself, how could she have stopped the attack of a giant beast with one hand while still yawning? Despite her excellent embroidery skills, her basic stats were as weak as his. Lyra asked him if he understood, pointing out that a person could become a hero simply through their sewing skills. Chloe added that it's not just about sewing and embroidery skills. Lyra encouraged Tim, saying that since he had practiced many different serving skills, he could surely become even better. She suggested that if he wanted to, with those skills, he could absolutely become the strongest person in the world. Tim wondered if he could use his family skills in combat, but he realized that these skills were inherently meant to serve others and contribute to a rich, happy life. Lyra asked about the text that mentioned that even without sewing skills, they could still tie up their enemies. Chloe teased Tim, asking if he wanted to try tying her up. Tim replied that he would never do such a cruel thing to her. Gilnariz commented that perhaps the experiment would be interesting. Because she was about to take on a task to gather herbs, she suggested that the three of them, excluding Chloe, take on the task and try to subdue a weak monster. Tim suggested that they should take Chloe back to the inn first. The lovely Chloe said she wanted to go along too, thinking it would be a lot of fun. Gilnariz, captivated by Chloe's charm, reluctantly agrees, but explains that the sea monsters can be dangerous and they cannot adequately protect her. Gilnariz tells Chloe that it would be safer for her to stay at the inn, and when they return, she will be welcomed. Chloe agreed, but only on the condition that no one got hurt. Everyone agreed, and after taking Chloe back to the inn, they continued on to gather herbs. While gathering herbs, Lyra discovered the domesticated herbs necessary to fulfill the requirement. Now it's time for the main mission, destroy the monster. Lyra spotted a slime and suggested they attack it. Gilnariz agreed, saying they should go there. Tim wondered how they would cope with his lack of domestic skills. He grabbed his cooking utensils, feeling somewhat out of place. Hiding behind the bushes, they observed the slime, and Lyra remarked that they should treat the slime as an ingredient. Tim thought that if slime was an ingredient, it should be in liquid form. He started using the electric mixer to beat it. Gilnerise stopped him, telling him to wait, because the slime was starting to grow as big as a meringue. As it continued to grow, Tim realized the situation was spiraling out of control and said it wouldn't be good. Tim wondered if there was any other way to calm or attack the slime. Lyra suggested heating it up. Tim was startled when he heard her say that. He thought about the skills needed to do that and realized this could be very dangerous, as slime can shoot everywhere. He quickly warned Gilnerise and Lyra to stay away. As soon as the slime hit them, Gilnerise asked Tim to shield her. Tim quickly apologized and said he would use the technique they had discussed earlier. Lyra, clearly in shock, with blood flowing from her nose, remarked that Gilnerise was covered in a white, slimy substance. Lyra fainted shortly afterward. Tim rushed to ask if she was all right. After a while, when Lyra woke up, she said that the slime was indeed a tough opponent. Tim felt relieved to see that she was safe. He thought to himself that before he forgot, he should try tasting the slime. When he did that, he noticed it was bitter and sticky on his tongue, but he was able to identify its properties. He realized that if the toxins were removed, slime could be useful for protecting wounds. It also conducts electricity and absorbs heat very well, explaining why it's so sticky and stretchy. He thought that slime could be used for another purpose as well. Lyra noticed his actions and told him not to put the slime in his mouth, as it could be poisonous. Then she moved closer and asked him to open his mouth so she could suck it out. Tim froze, surprised by Lyra's intimacy. She reassured him that it was a medical procedure. Gilnerise also spoke up, offering to help, saying they would take turns. Tim replied that he was just memorizing the taste and there was no need to worry, since he had already removed the toxins. Lyra replied that she was sorry she couldn't help, but also surprised by him. Tim explained that they hadn't told her about it. Gilnerise admitted that she was shocked by Tim's actions and thought Lyra already knew. Later, on the way back to the guild, the group was in high spirits after completing the mission. Gilnerise remarked that Tim had defeated a monster for the first time using only his own strength. Lyra suggested celebrating. Tim thanked them and said it was all thanks to Lyra's advice. He thought to himself that he had finally defeated a monster. Then he said he would go deliver the herbs. Upon entering the guild, Tim sensed something was amiss. He handed the herbs to the boy behind the counter and received his reward. Tim noticed the reward was only 300 sol, but it was still the first reward from a mission. Then Gilnerise asked the boy behind the counter about the strange silence in the guild. The boy pointed to a person sitting at a table drinking tea. Tim asked who that person was. The boy went on to explain that the other person was Ortania Edel, the heir to the noble Edel family. For some reason, he showed up at the Residence Guild, and everyone avoided him, not wanting to be seen by him. Lyra suggested they return to the inn without causing any trouble. However, at that very moment, Ortania stepped forward. He knelt down. He looked at her with sincere eyes and said that he was completely captivated by her. He apologized for not bringing her anything, explaining that he couldn't find a flower that suited her, one as beautiful and strong as her eyes. Gilnerise glanced at Tim, wondering if that was really true. Tim realized they were in trouble. They couldn't afford to displease the noble family, so they needed to handle the situation tactfully. Ortania then introduced himself formally, saying it would be an honor if Gilnerise considered him her lifelong partner. He assured her she would never regret it, for he was destined to be the most outstanding nobleman. Ortania took Gilnerise's hand, seemingly intending to kiss it. Tim was completely taken aback by this action. He thought there was no need for such a big fuss. A simple handshake would suffice. He tried to remain calm and regain control of the situation. Ortania began to speak, greeting them with polite and formal words, but Tim was having trouble keeping his composure. Finally, unable to control his frustration, Tim punched Ortania to stop him. Tim immediately realized he had crossed the line. Lyra told Tim there was no need to worry, adding that if he didn't act that way, she certainly would. The woman accompanying Ortania glared angrily at Tim and asked how he dared to hit him. However, Ortania calmly asked her to remain calm, reminding her of the reason he had come. He stood up and remarked that actions speak louder than words. And this time, it seems both Tim's words and his punches are proof of that. Ortania apologized for his earlier rude behavior, explaining that he had been raised in a mansion his entire life, and therefore was rather naive in some matters. He admitted that he didn't even realize Tim hit him, and asked why. Tim thought to himself that he couldn't confess to hitting Ortania, because he didn't want to give him a reason to harm Gilnerise. Lyra replied that Tim only acted that way because Ortania had annoyed him. Tim added that the reason was completely illogical. Ortania chuckled softly, realizing something from Tim's reaction, then apologized for her insensitive question. He explained that his hairstyle was a family tradition and suggested that Tim shouldn't be jealous of it. Tim thought Ortania didn't seem angry after all the commotion, and began to regret his hasty actions, realizing how selfish they had been. Tim turned around and apologized to Ortania, asking if he wanted to retaliate in that way. But before Ortania could reply, Gilnerise stepped between them, suggesting Ortania hit her instead of Tim. Ortania, surprised, replied that hitting women was against his principles, and this was the first time he had been beaten. Surprisingly, he found the experience quite enjoyable. Gilnerise wondered if he was really that naive about the world around him. Lyra wondered if things should be left as they were. Ortania then asked Krisha for guidance, as there was still much he needed to learn. Krisha agreed and asked him to take good care of himself. Ortania said the matter was settled and encouraged them to call him Orta. Both Gilnerise and Lyra were annoyed with him and disliked him intensely. Tim wasn't sure, but if this helped to make peace, he would cooperate. Ortania asked them to teach him how to fight. Tim began by showing them that they should first pull their hand back and then push their fist forward. Ortania followed the instructions, adding a hip rotation to increase strength, then asked, "Is that okay?" Gilnerise wondered if he would continue asking questions, finding it annoying that he was joining them. Lyra remarked that it would be exhausting. Gilnerise asked if she could lead him on a mission tomorrow, because she had a child waiting for her at the inn. Ortania agreed, saying they would surely feel lonely, so they should hurry and go together. Gilnerise remarked that he would actually follow her all the way to the inn. When they arrived, a girl and Chloe greeted them. When Chloe saw Ortania, she asked him who he was. Ortania smiled and introduced herself as the heir to the noble Edel family, adding that they would be staying at the inn overnight. The girl was delighted to learn that a true nobleman would be staying here. Chloe stood up and greeted Ortania formally. Ortania praised it as a perfect welcome and said she seemed very well educated for her age. Lyra was delighted to hear the compliment, but Gilnerise said that it wasn't thanks to Lyra. Chloe explained that she had read many books about the aristocracy, so she knew how to behave and even how to make tea. She offered to make tea for everyone immediately. A nearby girl spoke up, saying that their tea was of poor quality and unsuitable for serving a nobleman. Ortania dismissed it, saying it was nonsense. There's no distinction between high and low in taste, it's just a matter of personal preference. He added that he still wants to drink tea. Tim was surprised, thinking that Ortania would be arrogant and selfish, just like Tim in the past. The girl quickly ran to call her father. Chloe served tea to Ortania. He remarked that she seemed to love books, as her fingerprints were quite faint. Then he asked if she had learned how to make tea from books. Chloe agreed, but said that this was her first time making tea, so it might not turn out as well as she'd hoped. Ortania said that was nonsense. That loose-leaf tea should be honored when brewed by a diligent learner like herself. Tim sensed that Ortania and Chloe seemed very happy, and he regretted having misjudged him. Then, Ortania told Chloe that he wanted to pursue her, with the intention of marrying her. Tim quickly tied Ortania up with rope. Ortania asked him in surprise what he was doing, then jokingly said that Tim wanted to keep his good looks with him. Tim yelled at him to shut up, calling Ortania a pervert because Chloe was only 9 years old. He also said that Ortania could not be trusted. Gilnerise agreed and remarked that Ortania had lost her mind. She scoffed, saying it was enviable to be tied up like that, and demanded that he be sent away. Tim asked Ortania if he ever thought before he spoke. Ortania replied that age meant nothing, and that there weren't many people as hard-working and intelligent as he was. Unlike Tim, who lacked any intelligence whatsoever. Gilnerise told Ortania not to insult Tim and Lyra. Lyra added that it was bad to jump to conclusions about them. Chloe surprisingly said that she liked Tim's goofy side. Then the girl returned with her father. The man was shocked to see a nobleman tied up. He asked what was happening. That evening, after Ortania had finished bathing, he complimented Tim's pajamas, saying they were wonderful and that the material was superior to even the clothing of the nobility. Tim asked Ortania why he was leaving the mansion. Ortania asked why Tim was looking at him so coldly, and said there was no need to look at a piece of trash like him in that way. Gilnerise secretly thought she was very jealous of Ortania. Ortania then explained that the reason he left the mansion was to learn about society. While living in the mansion, Ortania had countless questions, but his father wouldn't allow him to ask, so he secretly went out alone. It all started 6 years ago, when a maid in the mansion sprained her ankle. Ortania realized that, as a nobleman, he had a responsibility to protect and guide the common people, and he saw the maid as one of them, someone he should respect. He treated her with great kindness. However, his father disapproved and scolded him, believing that serving a maid was demeaning and worrying about honor is madness. This made Ortania begin to doubt what his father had taught him. One day, he heard about Babetsu and decided to leave the mansion to see for himself. When he arrived, he witnessed commoners suffering discrimination. Ortania believed it was his duty as a nobleman to protect and guide them. Lyra remarked that Ortania had a great idea, but there's no need to worry because there are heroes to save Babetsu. Ortania was surprised to hear that. Then, Lyra suggested they visit the slum the following day. Chloe agreed, adding that it had been a long time and they should go there to cheer them on. The next morning, Ortania was drinking tea when the others arrived. He greeted them, and Tim replied that Ortania should have slept in their room. Ortania responded that, thanks to her ingenuity in creating a makeshift bed, even the hallway had become a cozy corner. Gilnerise's mention of seeing a nobleman sleeping in the hallway made Emma, the innkeeper's daughter, turn pale. Ortania explained that all the rooms were booked, so there was no other option. He also didn't think that bribing the innkeeper to get a room was the right thing to do. He then added that Ortania seemed very sincere, to the point of being a little strange. Chloe commented that he was very straightforward. Tim put on an apron and said he would make breakfast, but Ortania asked if he could fill in for her today. It's all thanks to Tim's meal yesterday, and moreover, he learned a lot from Ortania. Ortania enters the kitchen. Chloe remarked that he looked very busy. Lyra added that the food smelled delicious. Gilnerise teased him, telling him not to burn the bread. While we were talking, Tim wondered if Ortania was focusing too much on efficiency, and whether he was taking away their sense of anticipation and enjoyment. Ortania then brought out some eggs, which were slightly overcooked. Tim commented that it looked delicious. Gilnerise, meanwhile, jokingly remarked that at least Ortania had made it that far. She promised to make Tim's favorite omelet next. Lyra was surprised to hear about Tim's favorite dish and asked Ortania if she could teach her how to make it. Chloe suggested organizing a cooking party. Ortania told Tim that cooking isn't just about taste, but about stimulating all 5 senses. He added that Tim was a better cook than him, and it would be a waste to hide all the effort put into the dish. Lyra then called Tim over, saying she had made an omelet and asking how he was doing. Tim thanked her, but when he looked at the plate, he noticed something that didn't look right. Ortania remarked that it was a risky attempt at making an omelet. Chloe told Lyra that it would be great if she could make Tim's favorite dish, not just his favorite mineral. After everyone had left, Lyra remarked that cooking is really difficult. Tim told her that she always used too high a temperature, so the dish never turned out well. Chloe added that Tim would have to teach her how to cook properly. Gilnerise also asked to be taught. As they were walking, they saw a group of soldiers harassing people. Tim asked them to stop, saying that those people didn't deserve to be treated with contempt. The leader of the group of soldiers responded, saying that he knew how they had managed to erase evidence of their contempt. He threatened to imprison everyone for that reason and ordered his soldiers to be brutal, but not to kill anyone. Tim remarked that it was cruel and that even soldiers didn't spare children. Ortania stepped forward and ordered them to stop. He introduced himself as the heir to House Edel. The leader of the group of soldiers asked if Ortania was really him. Ortania confirmed this and demanded that they stop this foolish act. The soldier replied that Lord Oliver had approved these actions. Ortania was astonished to hear this. The leader of the group of soldiers went on to say that even House Edel could not resist the kingdom and that they had to obey the crown prince's orders. Then he told Ortania to stay away from this. Ortania said he would stay out, but he immediately punched the man in the face and asked him if his actions were right. The man looked at Ortania and asked if he was the heir to House Edel, warning that he would lose his inheritance for doing so. Ortania replied that breaking his promise to his father was one thing, but the worst thing is breaking a promise to yourself. He swore to protect ordinary people, and if they break a promise to someone else, they can make amends. However, if they violate their own principles, who can they turn to for forgiveness? Ortania thanked him and his friends for bringing him here. He said that from now on he would handle this himself and they should return to their normal lives. He added that it was a pleasure to be with them. As Tim prepared to help him, Gilnerise paused and said that they couldn't resist the kingdom. She admitted that this was truly unpleasant, but that was the reality of the situation. Lyra said she would follow Tim everywhere, ready to do anything he wanted. Chloe also sided with Tim. Tim reflected on his decisions, realizing that each choice came with responsibility. But now it wasn't just a matter for him alone anymore. The man then declared that Ortania would be arrested for treason. Gilnerise advised Tim to run away, warning that if they didn't leave immediately, they would also be caught. Tim apologized to Gilnerise and then lunged at the man. Ortania called Tim an idiot, asking why he made the same mistake again. He warned Tim that he wouldn't get away easily. Tim replied that Ortania was wrong, that he had thought carefully before acting, just like Ortania did. Gilnerise commented that Tim had truly matured, but this decision wouldn't be easy. Lyra said she was happy to see Tim stand up for those who are looked down upon. Chloe complimented Tim, saying he was cool. Tim thought to himself that even if he pursued someone as selfish as Ortania, he's really lucky to have such wonderful friends. He asked everyone to remember what he had said before. It is the small tasks that help people live rich and happy lives. If someone is unhappy, he wanted to serve them and help them find joy in life. Tim pulled out a broom and explained that before becoming an adventurer, he used to do odd jobs. Tim realized there was no turning back now. It felt like he was fighting against the entire kingdom. The commanding officer remarked that Tim was just a flattered delivery man. And surely he was joking, because what could that job possibly accomplish? Tim tried to stay calm and reminded himself not to panic. He knew the broom could reach further. He decided to attack first, hitting the soldier in the face, then using soap suds from the broom to blind him. With great determination, he launched an attack. However, before he could act, a lightning bolt struck, knocking him to the ground. Gilnerise told Tim that it's amazing that he was able to take down a soldier. Tim wondered if they were summoning lightning, but the remaining soldiers now realized with horror that Tim was no ordinary delivery man. They hadn't brought any magical soldiers with them, and they were utterly helpless. Tim was a high-level mage. However, Ortania calmly stated that it was still too early to be surprised. He raised his hands to the sky and began reciting the incantation. Tim felt confused, but quickly sensed a powerful surge of magical energy. He wondered if Ortania truly possessed such formidable abilities. The guards began to flee, whispering that they might be killed if they stayed any longer, and that no one had warned them about such powerful men. Ortania laughed loudly and declared that this would be a lesson. that they should learn not to harm others anymore. Tim remarked that it seemed they didn't need help, since ultimately no one was injured. Lyra remarked that it was a waste of magical energy. Chloe added that even the spells were confusing, and magic was just raw, unrefined power. Ortania replied that those knowledgeable about magic would realize that his abilities were limited. Chloe pointed out that Ortania's spell was completely different from the magic weaving technique Gilnerise had taught her. Ortania smiled and said that, although he had no innate talent for magic, but he believed that even the gods would be envious of such perfect abilities. He explained that he was born with poor reasoning abilities and was unable to grasp advanced magical techniques. Tim wondered what reasoning ability meant. Chloe explained that it was the ability to draw conclusions from experience. For example, understanding body movements can lead to understanding how to throw a punch. Conversely, Ortania needed to be taught everything step by step. Gilnerise added that magic is about creating connections. And even with extraordinary magical power, if you don't understand how to use it, that would also be useless. Ortania insisted that he could still cast spells as before. Lyra remarked that it might be useful as a shield of deception. Tim thought that perhaps this magic came from a powerful spell. Gilnerise suggested they go treat the injured. Tim told him to focus on treating them. Meanwhile, I began treating the injured. Lyra asked if they could do anything with the people still in handcuffs. Tim mentioned his laundry skills. This prompted Gilnerise to call him back. She explained that the handcuffs might be useful and suggested keeping them for later use. She joked that Tim could try them on her later. Tim agreed, realizing they could use handcuffs to restrain the enemy, although he couldn't let her be the one to carry them. Tim decided to give it a try, thinking that Gilnerise's thoughts were far-sighted considering the difficult battles ahead. It made sense to retain anything that might be useful. She thought that handcuffs might work on him. Tim began to wonder if there were any collars or gags lying around while continuing treatment, always remaining vigilant. After treating all the injured, a woman thanked them again. A man added that they didn't know how to express their gratitude. Gilnerise told them to hold back their thanks, as they still needed to find a way to help people escape the country without any problems. She then asked him if he could store them in his warehouse. Tim apologized, explaining that he couldn't store living creatures. She nodded, realizing it made sense. Just then Rock appeared, recognized them both, and asked what they were doing. A woman accompanying Rock smiled, delighted to see Tim again and saying it had been a long time. Tim recognized her as Rock and asked him how he was doing. Rock looked at Ortania and asked if he was the nobleman he had been keeping an eye on. Then he turned to Tim and asked how Tim knew Ortania. Gilnerise told him to calm down, explaining that Ortania was the fool who had punched a royal soldier. Ortania protested, asking who called him a fool. Rock laughed and said, "That's great." He always thought that all nobles were just the kingdom's hunting dogs, and he would playfully stroke Ortania's hair. Ortania asked him to stop, not to toy with her noble head. Rock then told them that one of their merchant friends had been approached by a poor, despised child. Through this experience, they became aware of the widespread discrimination in the country. They had prepared horse-drawn carriages and gathered people willing to help the despised escape. Although we incurred a considerable amount of debt during the process, everything is now ready. Gilnerise asks if the merchant is him and points out whether he won't lose business if he opposes the kingdom. Rock explains that they are rushing to get them out before travel restrictions take effect. Tim wondered why Rock had gone so far, questioning why saving just a few people wasn't enough. Rock and the others explained that after they were nearly killed by robbers, they learned a costly lesson. Human life cannot be valued. All their friends agreed to help those who were despised. Rock guessed that Tim also wanted to become someone like them, someone who could help others. Tim smiled, saying that he greatly respected Rock for that. At that moment, Ortania clapped her hands and called it a brilliant idea. He told Rock to send the bill and he would cover the cost of the horse-drawn carriage rides. Gilnerise asked if he hadn't been abandoned by Edel's family. Then he turned to Rock and asked about the plan to send the refugees. As it wasn't an easy task, Rock replied that he intended to bring them back to the Cynthia Empire, and that the new hospital quickly gained a good reputation. People even called the guild leader a goddess. Tim and Gilnerise were curious about the new hospital. Rock nodded and asked if they remembered Gilnerise's Adventurers Guild, which had now been converted into a new hospital named Fiona Cynthia Infirmary. He believes it will definitely work well. Gilnerise speculated that Ganache must have been involved in making it a success. Tim agreed with her, but before he could say anything more, a masked boy approached and ordered them not to move. Tim briefly wondered if the royal guards had returned yet. However, when the boy took off his mask, Tim and Gilnerise realized it was Prince Assad, who asked if they had managed to get rid of the guards. Tim asked why Assad was traveling alone. Assad explained that the first prince had sent soldiers to arrest those who were considered disrespectful, but when he followed them, he discovered that the guards had been dealt with. When Assad checked the area, he noticed the tracks had disappeared. He turned to Tim and asked if he was behind this. At that moment, Gilnerise intervened, asking what if Tim was indeed the one who did it. Assad expressed his gratitude, acknowledging that he couldn't have done it alone. Afterward, he apologized to everyone, admitting that he was the one who had caused them to be disrespected. Tim was shocked by this revelation. Assad explained that they all belonged to a race called the Spirian, who excelled in at least one special ability. He said that this is precisely why they are considered hateful. People, including his brother, Belial, feared the Spirian's abilities. This fear led to increasing discrimination as others sought to maintain power by suppressing the Spirians. And all of this was due to his own actions. Lyra recalled and asked why he did it. Assad replied that he had been deceived. He explained that those who receive Spirian blood transfusions will have altered blood, leaving them with only a few years to live. He issued a Spirian certificate to prevent errors during blood transfusions, even though he hadn't been informed of it. Gilnerise remarked that blood transfusion is an advanced medical practice. Assad agreed and added that the country places great emphasis on medical advancements. He worked hard to eliminate discrimination as quickly as possible. Gilnerise nodded in agreement and remarked that although Assad seemed a little strange, he had truly made significant changes. Assad smiled and said that love, especially a picnic, could be frightening. Just then, a little girl approached Assad, apologized for interrupting, and asked if he knew anything about her missing friend. Assad replied that he didn't know, but would ask the girl for more details. The girl explained that her friend's name was April, she had black hair, usually wore a yellow dress, and was very agile. 2 other children suddenly appeared, saying that their friend had also gone missing. Gilnerise wondered if this was really a large-scale child disappearance. Assad asked the children to describe in detail how each person had gone missing. Chloe then turned to Assad and asked what they should investigate about the day the children disappeared. Chloe pointed out that the children's stories seemed to suggest that they may have been kidnapped by the same person. Then Chloe asked all the children to raise their hands if they didn't have any relatives, and they all raised their hands. Chloe noticed that almost all the orphans had disappeared on the same day, which couldn't be a coincidence. She speculated that the kidnappers were probably targeting families less likely to arouse suspicion. Tim wondered what the kidnappers' motive might be.